Hey guys, tonight we're bundling up, mentally at least, and heading deep into the cold, dark, impossibly soggy winters of medieval Scotland. And spoiler, you probably won't survive this. Not without chilblains, a lungful of peat smoke, and a diet of boiled barley that may or may not come with rat. Still sound relaxing? Perfect. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. No pressure. Also, drop your city and what time it is in the comments below. I'm always curious where and when you're listening. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself standing in the middle of a frozen moor? It's bleak. The sky's a smothered grey that never really turns into daylight, just kind of hovers between fog and twilight, like even the sun can't be bothered to show up. There's a steady wind coming from somewhere that has no name, whipping through your cloak, if you're lucky enough to have one, and biting through every woolen layer like it's butter. It's cold. The kind of cold that doesn't just sting, it settles in, into your bones, into your thoughts, into your soul, honestly. And this is normal. Welcome to winter in medieval Scotland. It's the 1300s-ish. Dates aren't precise, because calendars weren't exactly pinned to every croft wall. Time's more of a feeling now, like, the sheep look frostier than usual, must be late November. You're part of a tiny rural village tucked somewhere into a windswept glen, and your main goal for the next several months is simple: don't die. That's it. There are no winter sports, no Christmas markets, no emergency heating, no emergency anything really. The land is raw, untamed. The highlands in winter are especially brutal. Miles of icy peat bogs and frost-locked hills where nothing grows and almost nothing moves except the wind. That wind is always there. It whistles through every crack in your home, finds the weak spots in your clothes, and makes your teeth ache, even when your mouth is shut. Your house, if you can call it that, is a low, smoke-filled, turf-roofed hut, built from stones you found lying around, and daubed together with a kind of prehistoric Play-Doh made from clay, dung, and whatever else held firm. The walls are thick, sure, but insulation isn't really a concept yet. The wind still gets in, the damp always gets in, and the roof, cleverly thatched with straw, tends to drip a little when the snow melts, which it rarely does before March. Every now and then, a rat rustles in the rafters, and someone swears it's the ghost of a cousin who died last winter. This is half a joke. Only half. You try to warm up beside the fire, but the smoke doesn't rise neatly through a chimney, because there is no chimney. It just sort of hovers under the roof and swirls around the room, looking for someone to slowly choke. Congratulations! You've just inhaled your yearly dose of lung-blackening soot. The fire itself? It's burning peat. No wood here. Trees are rare, sacred even, and mostly chopped down centuries ago. Peat's what you've got. Dug from nearby bogs, dried for months, then burned in pungent slow smoulders. It's damp, earthy, and smells like ancient moss having a midlife crisis. But it's heat. Sort of. And in this world, sort of is enough. Outside, the ground has frozen solid. Mud that squelched underfoot in summer is now rock hard and laced with ice. Your boots, if you have boots, don't help. They're stiff and cracked, held together with hope and animal sinew, and your toes stopped having feeling sometime last week. You don't mention it. Everyone's in the same frostbitten boat. And honestly, frostbite's not the worst thing you could get. The worst thing is hunger. Real, bone-rattling, sleep-interrupting hunger. Because winter doesn't care how well your harvest went. It will outlast your stores if it wants to. Maybe your community salted enough fish. Maybe someone bagged a deer in late autumn. Maybe the grain bins weren't eaten through by mice. But probably not. You're already eyeing the sheep a little more thoughtfully than you should. Not as wool providers, but as potential stew ingredients. Historically, Scotland's winters weren't just cold. They were long. Days with barely any sun. Nights that dragged on and on, where the only entertainment was talking, praying, and listening for wolves. Yes, wolves. They were still a thing. Sometimes they came closer in winter, hungry and desperate like everyone else. And let's just say the wooden doors didn't exactly have deadbolts. You wrap your hands around a clay mug of something warm. Probably weak ale. Water's not safe, even if it's frozen. Parasites don't take the season off. So children drink beer too. Don't get excited. It's weak. Barely alcoholic and mostly there to keep you from getting dysentery. Fun times. You listen as someone tells a story by the fire, an old one, about a man who tried to leave the village in a snowstorm and came back with a wild look in his eye and less family than he left with. Nobody asks questions. The kids pretend not to listen, but their wide eyes say otherwise. That's the thing. Survival here isn't just physical, it's psychological. Every winter strips a little more from you, your health, your hope, maybe even your memory of warmth. You don't count the days, you endure them. You wait for a thaw that feels more like a rumour than a guarantee. And yet, people did survive. Barely. Somehow. Through cooperation, faith, and a whole lot of stubbornness. There are debates now about just how cold it really got. Some say the Little Ice Age hadn't hit full swing yet. Others argue regional microclimates made it worse. But no matter which historian you side with, one thing is very clear. Medieval Scottish winters were no joke. And neither is your chill right now. Go ahead, tuck your blanket a little tighter around your shoulders. We're just getting started. You wake the next morning and for a second you think you've gone blind. Everything's grey. Grey sky, grey breath in front of your face, grey frost clinging to the inside of your walls. And then you realise, no, you're not blind. It's just winter. Again. The sun technically rose an hour ago, but you'd have to squint hard through the mist and low cloud cover to prove it. Daylight here isn't bright. It's more of a suggestion. There's no alarm clock, but the sounds of movement around you. The rustle of rough wool, the scraping of a pot, the groan of someone putting on cold boots, tell you it's time to start another day of trying not to freeze, starve, or slip on ice and crack your skull. So, you stand up, and your joints crack like a thawing branch. It's another perfect morning in medieval Scotland. You step outside into the sharp air and immediately regret it. Your nose protests, your eyes water. The air is so cold it tastes metallic like biting a spoon. Breath curls from your mouth in ghostly puffs, and the only colour in sight comes from a single patch of red lichen clinging stubbornly to a rock. It's the kind of landscape that doesn't look like it wants people to live here. But somehow, they do. And to make things better, or worse, time is a fluid concept in your village. No printed calendars, no clocks ticking gently on mantles. You tell the passage of days by the stars, by the state of the sheep's wool, by how your joints hurt. Some families keep simple notched sticks, carving a groove each day like prisoners marking time in a cell. Others rely on oral memory, which means arguments about whether it's Tuesday or the feast of some long-forgotten saint who died cold. This is where the old traditions start creeping in. You gather around a fire with the others as someone mutters about the length of the shadows and how the ravens flew lower yesterday. "Storm coming," says a voice. No science here, just instinct and centuries of observation. This is a world built on watching patterns. Nature isn't just scenery, it's the village's clock, calendar and warning system all in one. Some early versions of calendars do exist. If you walk several miles to a certain standing stone outcrop, a place the elders speak of like it's sacred, you'll find prehistoric stone circles aligned with solstices. One of them, maybe the stones of Callanish or something eerily similar, catches the low winter sun just right on the shortest day of the year. It's a reminder that your ancestors, ancient as they were watching the sky too. They had to. Missing the turning point of winter meant missing planting time later. And if you miss planting time, you miss eating time. And if you miss eating time, you die. But that's later. Right now, your job is just getting through this winter without counting the number of ribs in your neighbour's chest, because food scarcity does things to people. And speaking of the sky, it's worth mentioning that what little daylight there is doesn't do much for you. On the shortest days of December and January, you're lucky to get 6 hours of murky twilight. That's assuming the clouds part long enough to let in the pale sun. Most of the time, though, the sky's just a low-hanging sponge dripping icy mist on everything. It never fully rains. It just leaks, constantly. Even snow is a sometimes treat. More often, it's slush, wet, heavy, cold in all the wrong ways. When the snow does fall, it's beautiful in that eerie, too quiet way that makes you worry something's lurking behind it. Your footfalls are muffled. The sheep don't bleat as much. Even the wind dies down a little, like it's waiting. You don't trust snow, it hides things. Like ice puddles and animal tracks and pitfalls into frozen streams, it's nature's softest weapon. Still, some among your neighbours try to see the season through the lens of old belief. Winter, they say, is the time when the world sleeps. Trees sleep. Soil sleeps. Bears, well, there used to be bears, sleep. People don't get to sleep. People chop wood, drag water, try not to catch pneumonia, and hope they stored enough oats to last until April. There's also a lingering belief that winter is when the veil is thinnest. You might have heard that one around Samhain, when October ends and the nights stretch longer than your patience. It's the time of spirits, the time of old gods and older fears. People whisper about shape changes, the Bin-Ni who washes death clothes in frozen streams, and the Cailleach, Scotland's old winter goddess, stomping across mountains with frost in her hair. She supposedly controls winter itself, carving the landscape with her staff and deciding when spring will arrive. Spoiler, she's not in a rush, but don't laugh too hard at the folklore. When everything around you is dying or sleeping and your body aches from cold, it makes a weird kind of sense to believe in forces you can't see. In a way it helps. It gives winter a name, a face, something you can curse when the thatch collapses under ice, or the cow doesn't make it through the night. And here's something curious. Some early Gaelic poems actually celebrate winter, sort of. They talk about the fierce joy of surviving, of pushing through against the odds. It's not cosy, it's not romantic, it's raw, desperate pride. Like, ha! The wind tried to kill me again, but I'm still here. That's the vibe. Debates among scholars today continue about how much scientific understanding medieval Scots had of their climate. There's no consensus. Some argue that coastal communities understood the influence of ocean currents and tides more than we give them credit for. Others believe most folks just survived day to day, no theory required. What's clear is that observation was everything. You paid attention, or you paid the price. Back in your village, someone lights another peat brick and everyone scoots a bit closer to the fire pit. There's no talking for a while, just the sound of wind outside and the occasional cough, wet, rattling, and likely the start of something no one wants to name. A child stirs in the corner, wrapped in too thin wool, already pink with cold even under the blankets. His mother pulls him closer, mutters something in Gaelic under her breath. A prayer maybe, or a curse. You don't ask. Instead you stretch your legs and stare into the flames. They flicker low, guttering as the damp peat hisses. The smell is earthy and thick, clinging to your hair, your clothes, your thoughts. You'll carry it with you everywhere long after the fire's out. And outside the cold deepens. You duck back into the croft just as the wind kicks up again, slamming into the walls with that low, hollow sound that makes everything inside shiver, your bones included. You're grateful for any shelter, even if this one is the architectural equivalent of a damp sock. It's not much, but it's better than sleeping outside with the crows, right? Though depending on how last night went, you can't be entirely sure someone didn't end up doing exactly that. Your home, like everyone else's here, is made for function, not comfort. It's called a black house, but not because it's gothic or edgy. It's black because the smoke from the peat fire stains everything. The walls, the ceiling, the rafters, your lungs. If it's inside, it's black. The roof is thatched thick with straw, layered over a wooden frame that creaks threateningly every time the wind changes direction. The structure squats low to the ground, not from humility, but because tall buildings tend to blow away. Inside, the floor is compacted dirt, occasionally covered in rushes that need changing far more often than they get changed. One corner of the room has been roughly fenced off for the animals. Yes, inside. Heat is hard to come by, and a cow gives off a surprising amount of it. Plus, if the wind outside keeps howling the way it is, you're going to be cuddling that cow like it's your childhood teddy bear. There's no glass in the windows, just a crude wooden shutter that closes at night or during storms, which is most nights. There's a single doorway, maybe covered by a thick wool curtain or rough-hewn door if you're lucky. Otherwise it's just open to the cold. People like to imagine medieval life as rustic and charming. This isn't that. It's mud, it's smoke, it's livestock stepping on your foot at midnight. And if you think insulation is a modern problem, you're right. But it's also your problem. Cold leaks in from every direction. The walls are stone, but they hold the cold like they're hoarding it. The roof isn't much better. If you sit too close to the outer wall, you'll wake up with ice crystals in your hair. Blankets are made of wool, sure, but they're thin and heavy at the same time, and most are second-hand, meaning they've seen things you don't want to think about. Still, you do what you can. People hang animal skins over the door and windows to block the worst drafts. Some even layer moss between the roof thatch to slow the drip of melting frost. It's not perfect, but nothing here is. And oh, the draft. It's not a slight breeze kind of draft. It's the kind of bone-deep chill that creeps in like a gossiping neighbour. Quiet, rude, and impossible to get rid of. You've got a fire going, sure, but it doesn't heat the room. It just stakes out a warm patch directly around itself, and even then, only if you sit within licking distance of the flames. Anything beyond that radius? Arctic tundra. You find yourself rotating slowly in place like a roasting chicken, trying to toast one side of your body without setting your cloak on fire. This is a skill everyone here learns young. The art of partial thaw. One side of your leg feels like it's sweating, while the other is basically a popsicle. Furniture is minimal. Maybe a rough table, a bench, and if someone in the family was particularly handy, or stole something nice, there could be a wooden chest or two. Beds, if they exist, are nothing like what you'd want to sleep in. A simple wooden frame stuffed with straw covered in itchy wool or a threadbare animal pelt. You share it with at least 2 other people, probably 3. Privacy isn't really a thing. Body heat is. There's a weird comfort to it, though, the closeness. When the wind is howling outside and everyone's huddled near the fire telling stories, sharing whatever thin stew's left, it's easy to forget how cold it really is for a moment. You almost trick yourself into thinking you're warm. Quirky historical note. In some communities, livestock weren't just kept inside for warmth. They were also named family members. There are records of cows having names, being mourned when they died, even mentioned in songs. You don't joke about that here. If your only source of milk, warmth, and potential dinner has a name like Morag or Sumas, you respect her. And let's not forget, no bathrooms. There's a corner chamber pot if you're lucky. Otherwise, it's a brisk nighttime walk to the edge of the croft with a torch and a prayer. Try not to slip on the ice, or step in something worse. The ground outside is basically a communal litter box for humans and animals alike. In the morning, a few unlucky souls will shovel it into the midden heap. And yes, it's frozen. Solid. Good luck with that. But this rough living has a logic to it. The architecture here wasn't designed for aesthetics. It was designed by centuries of trial and error. Tall buildings with peaked roofs got blown away. Flat roofs collapsed under snow. Crofts were built low, with thick walls, and often sunken slightly into the earth to steal what little geothermal heat they could. In some places, people even built their homes into hillsides. Nature isn't an enemy here, but she's not your friend either, so you work with her when you can. There's some debate among archaeologists about how uniform these homes really were. Did every family build the same kind of house? Or were there local variations, materials, layouts, warmth levels, depending on geography and resources? Some remains suggest that wealthier clans had more spacious dwellings, sometimes even with separate quarters for animals. But for most folks, a house was one room, all-purpose, all the time. You hear someone outside chopping wood. That's your fuel for the week, if you have trees. If not, you're back to digging peat. Your hands are already cracked from the cold, your nails black with dirt. No gloves, just calluses and complaints. And when it's wet outside, and it's always wet, it makes everything heavier. A single peat brick can feel like dragging a corpse if it's soaked through. But still, you keep going. Because what else is there to do? The croft may be crude, but it's your only refuge from a winter that wants to eat you alive. It's where you sleep, where you eat, where you listen to stories, where you pray, where you wait for the sun to return, and outside the wind keeps blowing. Because it never really stops. Not here. You wake up hungry. Again. Not the polite kind of hunger you feel when you skip lunch, but the gnawing, hollow ache that makes your ribs feel loose and your brain weirdly floaty. It's been like this for days. Weeks, maybe. Hard to tell anymore. Time gets muddy when you're eating the same greyish stew for every meal, or worse, when there isn't stew. This is winter in medieval Scotland, and if you thought freezing to death was the worst part, surprise. Hunger is right up there, grinning at you from the shadows like it's got time to wait. The food situation is, in a word, grim. Every village handles it a little differently, but most of them have the same basic plan. Harvest what you can in late summer and fall, salt or smoke what's perishable, dry everything else, cram it into whatever storage space isn't already full of tools or rodents, and hope you didn't miscalculate. Because if you did, you've just condemned your family to a very long, very slow kind of death. No pressure. Your winter pantry, if we're being generous and calling it that, might include barley meal, oats, dried peas, salted meat, usually pork or fish, and maybe a root vegetable or two if the ground gave you mercy. There's no fresh bread unless someone dried the grain and managed to keep a bit of yeast alive. There's no fruit unless someone brined apples in a barrel and remembered where they put it. And there's definitely no sugar. Sweet things are rare and mostly forgotten by this time of year, like distant childhood dreams or the feeling of having all your toes. Today's breakfast: thin porridge. Again, it's water, oats, and a sprinkle of salt if you're living wild. There's no milk, it went sour weeks ago, or the cow dried up. If you're lucky, there might be a scrap of smoked fish dropped in to add flavour, which is a generous way of describing it. The texture is lumpy, and the smell hovers somewhere between barn floor and old sock. But you eat it anyway, because what's the alternative? In lean years, meals stretch even thinner. People start boiling bark, eating boiled nettles, making broth from bones so old you have to smash them open just to suck out the last trace of marrow. There are actual records of this. Archaeologists have found bones that had been cracked, boiled and scraped again and again until they were practically dust. That wasn't just efficient, that was desperation with a ladle. And yes, let's go ahead and address the rumours. Cannibalism, technically rare, but not unheard of. There are scattered reports in famine years, whispered about in later centuries, entire villages lost, children disappearing, a cousin who went to look for turnips and never came back. Were they eaten? Who knows? The line between folklore and fact gets blurry in the snow. But when the food runs out, people do things they never thought possible. You start staring at the family dog with unsettling math in your eyes. Quirky fact time. There were actually laws in some parts of Scotland about the communal use of food stores. In tight-knit clans, it wasn't unusual for the chief or headman to ration food and redistribute it during hard winters. There was honour in keeping people alive, but also pressure. If someone was hoarding, they might wake up with their storehouse mysteriously emptied, and no one would admit to doing it. Because food wasn't just survival, it was political, it was power. That means food storage became a kind of sacred ritual. Every bit of grain was protected like gold. People dug underground pits to keep root vegetables cool but unfrozen. They hung meats from the rafters to keep them dry and away from rats. Salted fish was stacked in barrels, layered carefully like a sad, oily lasagna. The whole system was delicate, and if any part failed, if a rat got in, if mould took hold, if someone got greedy, it could collapse everything. There were winter meals with cultural importance too, believe it or not. Holidays like Yule or Imbolc offered the chance to bring out something a little more special. Maybe a better cut of meat, or something sweetened with honey, if anyone still had honey. These weren't feasts like in the movies. They were small moments of comfort, a reminder that not everything about winter was punishment. And yet, food was never far from anyone's mind. It defined your day, woke you up, decided what chores you'd do, collect firewood or go ice fishing maybe. It determined who you spent time with. If someone had a better stash, you might suddenly drop by their croft, all casual-like, pretending it was a social call when really your eyes are locked on that pot simmering in the corner. Some villagers kept chickens, and if you did, eggs were gold. Literal life-givers. The problem is that chickens don't lay much when it's freezing. They huddle together, barely clucking, and you start looking at them more for meat than breakfast. But again, you wait, you stretch, you scrape the bowl, because winter isn't a sprint, it's a siege. There's debate among historians about just how severe Scottish winters were in the medieval period. Some believe the weather was more temperate in earlier centuries, only turning nastier during the Little Ice Age in the 1300s and beyond. Others argue that even before then, the combination of high rainfall, poor soil and short growing seasons made food security a constant struggle. Whatever the case, it's clear that food shortages weren't a freak event. They were expected. Even children felt the weight of it. They were sent to dig roots, gather moss for kindling, or guard the food stores from pests. There was no kids' table during winter meals. Everyone ate the same bland, soupy gruel, and everyone hoped it would last. By late February, hunger turned sharp. The stores are down to almost nothing. People start thinning out their portions. More water in the porridge, fewer scraps in the stew. You see it in people's faces, cheeks hollowing, eyes sinking, hands trembling from cold and lack of calories. You stop expecting to feel full. Now you just hope to feel not worse. Tonight there's talk of trapping. Someone swore they saw rabbits in the lower glen. Someone else says it's a waste of time. They've already been picked clean by the next village over, but you go anyway. because it beats sitting by the fire and thinking about how your stomach feels like it's folding in on itself. Outside, the wind is bitter, your feet crunch on frost, every breath cuts. But if you bring back something, anything, you're a hero, you're dinner's saviour, and if you don't, well, there's always more bark to boil. The fire sputters a little lower tonight and nobody bothers to add more peat. You're trying to ration it just like everything else. That's the problem with winter here. It's not just one thing, not just cold, not just hunger, not just the wind that sounds like it's trying to whisper insults through the cracks in the door. It's all of it, stacked together in a kind of slow, rolling misery sandwich. And tonight, the topping is smoke. Lots of it. You sit cross-legged near the hearth, blinking through the haze. Your eyes sting. Your lungs feel heavy. Someone across the room coughs that deep, gravelly cough that's starting to sound a little too familiar. And nobody says anything, because what can you say? You're all breathing it in, every hour, every day. The thick, tarry cloud of burning peat, the only heat source for miles, and also, quite possibly, the reason your chest feels like it's filling with wet sand. Peat is a miracle in a way. No trees out here, not in numbers. The highlands are mostly treeless thanks to a few thousand years of enthusiastic deforestation and general environmental indifference. So when winter comes knocking, you turn to the bog. Peat is basically ancient plant matter that's been squished and marinated in swamp juice for millennia. You dig it up in thick bricks, dry it for weeks, or months if you're planning ahead, and then burn it in your hearth for heat and light, and the vague sense that you're not completely powerless against nature. Problem is, peat smoke is not subtle. It doesn't waft gently into the night. It sits, it clings, it curls upward, and then, with no chimney to guide it out, it just kind of lounges around the top of the room like it pays rent. That's why they call them black houses. Not for colour scheme or mood, but because the ceilings and rafters are literally black with soot. And that soot, it goes into your clothes, your hair, your food. It coats your pots. It slides down the walls and gets under your fingernails. It lives inside you, slowly. A creeping presence in your chest. If you're very old or very young, you're the first to feel it. The coughing starts. The chest pain follows. There's no word for chronic bronchitis in your village, but plenty of people understand what it looks like when someone starts shrinking away under the weight of their own lungs. It's not just coughing either. There's eye damage, sinus problems, and a strange hoarseness that you can't shake no matter how much hot broth you sip. But you still sit by the fire, because the alternative is freezing. It's always a trade-off here. You want warmth? Breathe in a little more death. You want clean air? Go stand outside until your teeth fall out from shivering. What's strange is how you stop noticing it after a while. The smoke becomes part of the air. Part of you, really. You adapt. You learn to duck under the lowest swirl when you walk across the room. You figure out the best spot to sit where you're warm but not wheezing. You learn to squint through the haze like it's just fog inside your house. And sometimes someone tries to get fancy. There are rumours of crofts with actual smoke holes cut into the roof. Primitive vents that let some of the smoke escape. Maybe even a chimney if you're unimaginably rich or resourceful. But those are rare. Most people here just live with the smoke. It's the devil you know. Now, not to be dramatic, but modern studies have looked into this kind of indoor air quality, specifically in peat-burning homes in later Scottish history, and the results are pretty grim. High levels of particulate matter, increased risk of lung disease, eye irritation, reduced life expectancy. Scholars argue about just how bad it got in the Middle Ages, but it's safe to say that if you lived to a ripe old age out here, you did it while coughing. But back in the present, your medieval present that is, there's no such thing as clean air. You blow your nose and it comes out grey. You stir a pot and the top layer has a thin film of soot on it, like it's been sprinkled with ash. And you eat it anyway, because honestly, the ash might be the most flavourful part. Someone opens the door to head outside and the sudden rush of fresh air slices through the smoke like a knife. It's cold, painfully, brutally cold. But for a moment the room feels bearable. You take a deep breath and cough instantly, your lungs unused to anything that isn't 80% combustion byproduct. Then the door closes and the smoke settles back in, patient and suffocating as ever. Your clothes stink. Everyone's do. You don't notice until someone new arrives from another village and smells slightly different. More fishy than smoky, maybe. And it hits you just how much you all reek. But it's not like anyone's bathing regularly. Not in this weather. Water freezes. Soap's a luxury. And you're not stripping down for a scrub unless you want hypothermia and a visit from the kayak herself. Here's a fun fringe fact for you. Some people believed that smoke actually protected you, drove out bad spirits, kept illness away, which is weirdly ironic considering how often it caused illness. But again, in a world where invisible forces are blamed for everything from plague to sour milk, it makes sense. If your whole family is still breathing, maybe that black ceiling overhead isn't so bad after all. The kids don't complain because they've never known anything else. They run around the room, playing in the smoke like it's fog from a haunted moor. Their cheeks are red, their noses constantly dripping, their hair thick with the smell of fire and livestock. They sleep closest to the hearth on the coldest nights, little bodies curled like cats, breathing in slow. You glance up at the ceiling and wonder how long it's been since anyone cleaned it. Not that it matters. You'd need a ladder, a miracle, and the kind of optimism this place doesn't support. Besides, even if you scraped it clean, it would blacken again by next week. Some things just are. And still the peat burns, because it has to. You feed it another brick and watch the flame catch. It's slow to start, always is, but it eventually flares to life with a hiss. The fire doesn't roar, it just murmurs, a steady whisper in the dark. It's not enough to make you warm, but it's enough to make you stay. And outside the night is darker than it has any right to be. You pull your cloak tighter around your shoulders, though it doesn't help much. It's made of wool, sure, but not the soft, luxurious kind you're probably imagining. This is the rough, scratchy, sheep still attached in spirit variety. It itches, constantly, and despite the weight, it somehow lets every whisper of wind and moisture slide right through to your skin. You try not to think about how many winters it's seen, or how many people before you have worn it, or what exactly that crusty patch near the hem is. Some things are better left unidentified. In medieval Scotland, the clothes aren't made for fashion. They're barely made for function. They're patched, worn and repurposed until they're more thread than fabric. If something rips, you sew it. If it gets stained, you just keep wearing it. If it smells, and it does, you pretend you don't notice. Winter isn't a time for clean laundry anyway. Water's frozen, soap's expensive, and wet clothes mean death. So the rule is simple. Keep it dry, even if it means keeping it dirty. You're wearing layers. Not because they're warm, but because that's all you have. An undershirt of coarse linen, stiff from too many washes in cold water. A tunic of heavy wool, dark and full of holes. Maybe a cloak or overcoat if you've inherited one from someone who died with the good sense to hang on to it until the end. Your legs are wrapped in wool hose, itchy and sagging, fastened with strips of leather or twisted cloth. On your feet, if you're lucky, leather shoes, cracked and misshapen. If not, wool foot wraps, already damp from melted frost and yesterday's panic run to check the snares. And there's no such thing as waterproof here. Not really. Everything soaks through eventually. The wool helps retain some warmth when wet, but it's a losing battle. Once you're damp, you stay damp. You dry off by the fire if there's room, or you just don't. More than one villager has come down with a chest cold after walking back from the fields with rainwater dripping down their back. And around here, a chest cold can be the first step to an early grave. Still, people do their best to get creative. Cloaks are pinned at the shoulder with brooches or wooden toggles, sometimes layered with fur around the neck if someone in the household managed to trap a fox or steal a pelt from someone less lucky. Hats and hoods are stitched from leftover cloth or occasionally felted wool, stiff and lumpy, but at least something to trap the heat that's trying to escape through your skull. Mittens are rare. Fingers are often left exposed, red and cracked, more tools than limbs. Some of the elders still wear garments dyed with natural plant colours, muted yellows from lichens, browns from tree bark, soft greys from iron-rich mud. But winter tends to bleach everything into one uniform palette of survival beige. The only pop of colour might come from a plaid, or brecon, if you're from a highland clan that still holds tight to traditional patterns. Not the modern tartans we romanticise now. These are more like bold, rough weaves with earthy streaks of green and brown, woven on narrow looms, draped and belted and functional above all. And speaking of belts, yes, you wear one. Everyone does. Not for fashion, but for utility. It holds your knife, maybe a pouch, maybe some dried herbs. You never know what you'll need in the cold. Your hands are often too numb to dig around in your pockets, and this way your gear's always at the ready. You don't have much, but what you have needs to be on you. Always. Now here's something slightly bizarre but true. Some people stuffed their clothes with straw. Yep, just jammed it right in there between layers to trap body heat. It worked, in a way, like medieval insulation. The downside, you looked like a lumpy scarecrow and probably squeaked when you moved. But when it's between fashion and frostbite, dignity gets left at the door. And speaking of fringe facts, let's talk lice. They're everywhere. You're itching right now and you're not even sure if it's from the wool or the bugs, but the truth is, lice are part of daily life. Everyone has them. You comb them out when you can, pick them out of seams, and just accept the rest. During winter, when bathing is near impossible, lice practically throw a party in your layers. There are even traditional songs and jokes about them, little rhymes told by the fire, mostly as a way to keep from screaming. So yes, you're layered up, but not layered well. Modern thermal strategies? Not a thing. There's no moisture wicking, no breathable fabrics. Everything is thick, scratchy, and heavy. Your clothes weigh you down, especially when wet, and walking uphill in them feels like dragging a reluctant sheep behind you, yet you don't dare take them off. You wear them to sleep, you wear them to eat, you wear them until they fall apart or someone dies and leaves you a better set. There's debate among historians about just how uniform these outfits were across Scotland. Some argue that Highlanders and Lowlanders had vastly different dress styles, influenced by trade, clan identity, and access to materials. Others believe the basics were the same. Wrap yourself in whatever you have, make it last, and pray for spring. What's clear is that warmth was a constant priority, and luxury. There's evidence of fur linings in wealthier homes, of imported textiles for the nobility, but for most people, warmth came from wool, fire, and body heat. And yes, the cold gets into your bones, not just your hands and feet, deep, the kind that makes you move slower, think slower. You start to dread the moment when you have to get undressed for any reason. Changing clothes becomes a rare, planned-out event, usually involving someone standing nearby with a blanket and another peat brick. People sleep in their clothes, not out of laziness, but because taking them off could be a death sentence. Tonight you try to sleep again wrapped tight in your cloak, legs curled under you like some hibernating beast. Your feet are cold, your hands are worse. You tuck them into your sleeves and breathe slowly, trying to ignore the wheeze in your chest and the itch behind your knee. Someone stirs beside you and pulls their blanket closer. You hear the soft rustle of straw and cloth, and then only breathing. Slow, deep, cold. Outside, the frost creeps up the walls again, quietly, like it's checking to make sure you haven't forgotten it. You haven't. The sheep aren't doing well. You can tell just by looking at them, the way their wool clumps in frozen tufts, the way they huddle together near the wall of the croft, bleating low and miserable like they know something's coming. And something is coming. More frost. Maybe another blizzard, or maybe just a long stretch of icy nothing that quietly ruins everything. Because out here, winter doesn't kill with drama, it kills with silence. In medieval Scotland, livestock were lifelines. They weren't just animals. They were food, clothing, income, warmth, status, and hope, rolled into one shaggy, muddy package. Especially sheep. If you had sheep, you had wool, you had trade value. Maybe a little milk if the ewe was feeling generous, and eventually, if it came to it, you had meat. But during winter, they were as vulnerable as you were, maybe more. Farming, such as it is, shuts down by November. The ground is too hard to till, the snow too thick to dig through, and the wind makes every outdoor chore feel like a punishment from some forgotten god. Fields sit frozen, the soil split open like dry bread. What little grass remains is brittle, yellowed, and buried beneath frost. The animals that survive winter aren't eating. They're enduring, just like you. You've brought the most fragile livestock inside the croft, of course. There's barely room, and the smell is ambitious, but it's better than losing them. The cow stands silently in the corner, her breath misting the air as she shifts occasionally, dislodging the hay scattered beneath her hooves. 2 goats curl up by the fire if no one's fast enough to claim that space first, and the sheep, they get the shed, or the lean-to, or whatever patch of shelter you've managed to cobble together from scrap wood, dried turf, and increasingly shaky optimism. Feeding them is the hard part. You planned for this. You stored hay. You kept grain. You dried bracken. You made a careful count of everything back in October, doing mental math and hoping your neighbours weren't lying about how much they'd already burned through. But now it's January, maybe February, and your stores are lower than they should be. The sheep are eating the worst of what's left. Tough stalks, bark, dried leaves swept up in a hurry during the last clear day. One of them has started chewing at the wall, another tried to eat a piece of frozen cloth. You're running out of options. Sheep don't show weakness easily, but when they do, it's fast. One day they're standing, the next they're not, and the next they're stiff and silent. You bury them if the ground's soft enough. If not, you drag them to the edge of the woods and let nature take its course. Scavengers have to eat too. It's not personal. Nothing is in the dead of winter. And once a sheep is gone, you feel it immediately. That's one less fleece come spring, one less trade at market, one less source of meat. Though let's be honest, most people hesitate to butcher their livestock until the situation's truly dire. You don't kill a sheep just because it's hungry. You wait, you pray, and only when the family's down to boiling shoe leather and adding snow to thin the stew do you even consider it. And even then, there's a fight. Because slaughtering means giving up, and giving up means the winter won. Still, there's the practical side of it. The meat doesn't go far, but it lasts longer in this kind of cold. Outside, the temperature is nature's butcher. You salt what you can. Smoke some in the croft, though the peat smoke doesn't help the flavour. The rest, you cook slowly, carefully. Nothing wasted. Bones go into broth. Organs become a meal of their own. And the fleece, if it's salvageable, gets stored. Stiff with frost, maybe, but still useful come spring. If spring comes. Historical records show that livestock mortality during harsh winters could reach devastating levels. Some years, entire flocks vanished, starved, frozen, or claimed by predators that crept in from the wild. Wolves were still around back then. They came down from the hills, lean and silent, drawn to the smell of desperation. A lone sheep, already weak, didn't stand a chance. There's an open debate among scholars about how effectively medieval Scots managed their winter livestock care. Some argue that the integration of animals into croft life, bringing them indoors, even into shared living space, was a smart survival tactic, both for the animals and the humans. Others suggest that these conditions actually increased disease transmission, especially respiratory infections. Honestly, both are probably true. But when your survival depends on a single bleating wool lump, you don't have the luxury of debating sanitation. Out by the lean-to you find one of the sheep standing oddly, legs braced, eyes half-lidded. You already know. You reach out and pat her side, feel the slow rise and fall of her breath. Thin, laboured. She won't last. You've seen it before. There's a kind of resignation in these creatures, like they know they weren't made for this. Their ancestors maybe grazed on softer hills, in gentler climates. But these sheep, they're just trying to survive the same frozen misery you are, and here's a strange little cultural twist. Some families named their sheep. Not all. Many were just the ewe or the brown one, but occasionally you'd hear a name. A real one. Morag, Bonnie, Old Red. It added a weird tenderness to the whole thing. Made butchering a sheep in March feel like a funeral more than a meal. You weren't just eating meat. You were saying goodbye to a member of the household. It might sound sentimental, but when you spend every day staring at the same animals, relying on them, depending on them, yeah, names start to stick. That night you share a bowl of thin mutton broth with your family. It's salty, warm, and smells faintly of smoke and fur. No one talks much while eating. The room is quiet except for the occasional clink of spoons and the soft bleating from outside. You don't ask whose meat is in the pot. You don't have to. Afterward you wrap yourself in your cloak again, trying to ignore the way your stomach still feels hollow. Outside the wind picks up, a hard, sharp wind from the north. You feel it in the bones of the house. You feel it in your own bones, and you think about the sheep, what's left of them, and how much longer they can hold on. How much longer you can hold on. The ale is flat. Again. But you drink it anyway. Not because you like the taste, though let's be real. After a few mugs it grows on you in the same way mould grows on cheese, but because it's safer than water. In fact, in this frozen mud-slick corner of medieval Scotland, ale is about as close to a health drink as you're going to get. It hydrates you, gives a few measly calories, and doesn't come with a complimentary bout of dysentery. So down the hatch it goes. Water here is a gamble, wells freeze, streams run icy and quick, but they're often shared with livestock and, less charmingly, with everything the livestock leave behind. Boiling it would help, sure, but firewood and peat are in short supply and reserved for things that actually matter, like not freezing to death in your sleep. So you drink ale. Everyone does. Toddlers, elders, Monks, your uncle who smells like wet wool and bad decisions, all of them sip weak, cloudy brew from cracked mugs just to stay alive. This isn't the frothy, golden ale you might be imagining. It's thick, brown, and often full of sediment. Some batches are barely alcoholic, just enough fermentation to kill off the worst of the germs. Others are stronger, brewed longer, or with heartier grain, and can hit you like a cartwheel to the forehead if you're not careful. But even then, the buzz is more a side effect than the goal. This isn't partying. This is survival, with a mildly warm glow. Brewing is a communal skill. Every family has someone who knows the method. The process is simple, in theory. Malt some barley, boil it, strain it, cool it, add yeast, if you have yeast, and wait. But in practice, it's a delicate art of timing, temperature, and not accidentally poisoning yourself. If your batch goes wrong, you don't waste it. You just strain it a second time, maybe mix in some herbs to mask the off-taste, and pretend it's medicinal. Women handle most of the brewing in the village. They're called alewives, and their role is quietly vital. The good ones are respected, maybe even feared a little. A skilled alewife could make or break a family's winter. If her brew went bad, you'd see it in the sick faces at the hearth. If her batch turned out strong, people smiled more, laughed even. For a few hours, the cold didn't feel quite so sharp. That was no small magic. Of course, there were rules. Even back then, people understood the power of drink. Too much ale, and suddenly your neighbour's sheep looks like a personal insult. Fights happened, slurred arguments in the snow, someone swinging a club with no balance and even less aim. The village elders usually intervened, sometimes with stern words, sometimes with a solid whack to the head. Drunkenness was tolerated, but only if you still pulled your weight come morning. If you didn't, well, you might find yourself mysteriously short on firewood, or waking up with the unpleasant realization that someone borrowed your cloak accidentally. And yet, ale was so woven into life that even religious leaders allowed it. Monasteries brewed their own, of course, finer stuff, with more consistent recipes and ingredients brought in from trade. The monks knew what they were doing. Their ale was stronger, smoother, and better stored, often kept in cool, dry cellars carved into hillsides or rock. And perhaps not coincidentally, their winter survival rates were higher. When you're warm, fed, and sipping professionally brewed ale all winter, it's amazing how holy your life can feel. Back in your croft, your family shares a mug, yes, a single mug, passing it around after the evening meal. It's still warm from the fire, and though it smells a bit like sour grain and old socks, no one complains. You sip carefully, let it slide down your throat, and feel a flicker of warmth bloom in your belly. It's not much, but it's something. And right now, something is everything. There's even a word in Old Scots for the kind of warmth you get from ale. Cossagach, they might call it, though some argue that term came later. Still, the idea holds. That blend of contentment, firelight, full stomach, and slightly flushed cheeks. For a brief moment, the world doesn't feel like it's trying to kill you. But not all drink is equal. Some villages brew stronger stuff. Mead, occasionally, if honey's available, or herbal concoctions that smell more like medicine than pleasure. There's even a tale of a certain spiced ale used during midwinter festivals, steeped with wild herbs, bark, and something that may or may not have been hallucinogenic mushrooms. Did people see visions during those long nights? Maybe. Did the visions tell them spring was coming? Absolutely. Were they right? Almost never. There's also the occasional debate among scholars about how alcoholic medieval ale actually was. Some argue that daily table ale was so weak it barely qualified as booze, while others believe it had enough kick to explain the number of brawls recorded in local legends. The truth probably lies somewhere in the middle. Strong enough to matter, weak enough to keep functioning. Unless, of course, you wanted to disappear into a good buzz, in which case, just pour another mug. Tonight, after your sip, you stare into the fire for a long time. The peat crackles softly, the mug warms your hands. Outside, the wind has stilled for once, and snow falls in that eerie, silent way that makes the world feel like it's holding its breath. You let the ale dull your thoughts, not into a haze, but into a calm. You think about the days ahead, about the dwindling grain sacks, the dying sheep, the heavy smell of smoke in your clothes. You think about spring, if it's coming, and when. You think about how many people won't make it there. But for now, you take another sip, because it's warm, because it's safe, because it's the only clean thing left in the world. It's midwinter now. The nights are long, dark like ink, and stretched across the land like a wet wool blanket that never lifts. The kind of dark that seems to press against the walls of your croft, waiting for the fire to die so it can creep inside. You can feel it in your bones that we've crossed the halfway mark of winter, the tipping point of light and shadow, but it doesn't feel like a celebration. Not really. It just feels heavier. But tonight something's different. There's a stir among your neighbours, a low buzz of expectation, the kind of tension that only builds when people are cold, bored, and slightly desperate for any excuse to do something besides shiver in silence. It's time for the Midwinter Festival. Now, you might be picturing a medieval party with roasted boars, tumbling jesters, and hearty laughter echoing off stone walls. Yeah, no, this is Scotland, in winter, in a rural village where your biggest luxury is a second-hand cloak that smells like turnips and regret. But even here, even now, people need a break, and midwinter, whether it's called Yule, the Feast of St. Brigid, or just that night with the extra candles, is your best chance for one. You gather with others near the longhouse. It's not fancy, just a slightly larger croft with a roof that leaks marginally less than yours. Inside, the fire's already burning, and someone's gone all out. Dried herbs hanging from the rafters, a pot of something vaguely sweet simmering near the hearth, and a single taper candle burning in front of a carved wooden figure. It might be St. Brigid, or it might be an older goddess, her features softened by smoke and time. No one says for sure. In this village, some things are still left unspoken. Midwinter festivals in medieval Scotland were a strange, glorious mashup of old pagan traditions and newer Christian ones. Depending on the year and the church's mood, you might be singing hymns one moment and dancing around a bundle of straw the next. There are old stories passed down from the elders, tales of the Oak King and the Holly King battling for control of the seasons. There are rituals meant to encourage the return of the sun, lighting fires, burning last year's greenery, and occasionally scaring off evil spirits by banging pots together like drunk farmers, which coincidentally, most people are tonight. Because this is the one time of year where you break into the good stuff, that stronger ale, maybe a few apples stored under straw, a dusty jar of honey from the abbey, if someone was clever or generous, and if a family's lucky enough to have saved a sausage or two. Out it comes, sliced thin and handed out with quiet reverence like communion. Children laugh. Adults try to remember how to smile. Someone starts humming a tune that quickly turns into a song, and then suddenly people are singing. Not beautifully, not in harmony, but together. The kind of singing that reminds you your voice still works, that your lungs haven't given up entirely, that there's still some human left under all the wool and smoke. And then comes the storytelling, always the stories. Tonight's tale is about a Selkie woman who wandered inland one winter, lost her sealskin in the snow, and married a farmer who found her. But when spring came, she found the skin again, and left, with a look that made the cows cry for 3 days straight. It's sad and strange, and no one's sure if it's supposed to be a warning or a love story or both. But it fills the air. It matters. These tales are old, older than the church, older than the written word. They're told by candlelight and remembered by repetition. Some say they keep the world turning, that if the stories ever stopped, so would the sun. Is that true? Probably not. But in the middle of a winter this cold, belief is often more powerful than fact. Here's a fun historical tidbit. Some midwinter customs involved torchlit processions around the village boundaries. It was symbolic, of course, warding off darkness, reaffirming community, reminding the land that people still lived here. In bad years, these walks were silent. In better years, there were songs, even shouting. And in truly reckless villages, someone might wear an animal mask, leaping out from behind trees to frighten winter away. You wouldn't want to meet that guy after his 4th mug of ale. Of course, not everyone joined in. Some stayed behind, too sick, too old, or too bitter to celebrate. And sometimes, you couldn't help but notice the empty spots. The people who didn't make it through the last few weeks. The neighbour who'd been coughing. The boy who went hunting and never came back. The old woman whose fire had gone out. Their absence sat in the corners of the room like smoke, thick, quiet, and impossible to ignore. But for a few precious hours, none of that wins. Not the cold, not the hunger, not the grief, just laughter, the kind that bursts out suddenly and surprises even the person doing it. You laugh so hard your ribs hurt and someone jokes that you should save your breath for the next blizzard. Someone else accidentally knocks over a candle and half the village panics. But it's fine. It's fine. The house didn't burn down. Not tonight. There's still debate today among scholars about how widespread or uniform these winter traditions were across Scotland. Some say the Christian church tried hard to stamp out pagan remnants, replacing them with saints' days and holy masses. Others argue the blending was more peaceful, even practical. People weren't about to give up their only festival just because the name on the candle changed. And honestly, in a place where survival is the only real religion, no one's too fussed about the fine print. Eventually people drift home. The fire dies low. You wrap yourself in your cloak and step back out into the snow. It's quiet again. The air sharp and clean. You can see your breath in the moonlight, curling like fog, and for the first time in weeks you don't feel entirely defeated. Because winter hasn't won yet, and maybe, just maybe, it won't. You wake to the sound of hooves crunching in snow, not the slow, steady rhythm of someone hauling supplies or checking traps. This is faster, urgent. You sit up, cloak still wrapped around your shoulders, and listen. A few others are stirring too, faces groggy, mouths half open, trying to place the sound. It's not an everyday noise. It's a bad one. Someone's coming. And no one rides fast in the dead of winter unless something's gone very, very wrong. There's a knock, or rather a thump on the door. The kind that doesn't wait for permission. The door creaks open against the packed snow, and a young man staggers in, cheeks raw with windburn, eyes wide and rimmed with cold. He doesn't speak for a moment, just leans forward, panting steam into the room. Then, in a voice like cracking ice, he says the words no one wants to hear. There's been a raid. You feel the mood shift instantly, like all the warmth in the room got yanked out with the draft. No one moves. No one breathes. A raid. In winter. You'd think the cold would stop things like that. Fighting, theft, neighbourly murder. But no. Sometimes it encourages it. In places like this, where survival is a month-to-month negotiation with nature, desperate people do desperate things, especially if they think someone else's barn is fuller than their own. The man explains between chattering teeth. A neighbouring village, maybe 10 miles east, was attacked just before dawn. Crofts burned, livestock stolen. A few people dead. One of them was old Scotlan, the weaver. The raiders came fast and left faster, disappearing into the woods before anyone could get organised. And now the snow's already half covered their tracks. The room explodes into murmurs. Names are exchanged. Theories fly. Some say it was the McKendries. They've always been half-wolves anyway. Others argue it must be outsiders, maybe bandits pushed south by harsher weather up north. But a few stay quiet, eyes narrowed. They know how fast neighbour turns on neighbour when the oat bin runs dry. You might not think of Scotland's winters as a time for warfare, but historically small-scale violence didn't stop for snow. Large campaigns, sure. No one's marching 1,000 men through a blizzard. But for clan feuds, petty grudges and desperate survival raids, winter offered perfect cover. The darkness lingered longer, the sounds carried differently, tracks vanished in hours, and no one expected it. That's what made it effective. Tonight you sleep with your knife closer. It's not a good knife, more of a sharpened stick with aspirations, but it's what you've got. The Crofts' door is barred, though you're keenly aware of how little it would take to kick it in. You listen to the wind and wonder if it's covering the sound of more hoofbeats, more men, more fire, and you're not alone in this paranoia. The next morning the village meets to decide what to do. There's no formal leadership, just the same old argument with slightly colder fingers. Some want to send scouts, others want to move livestock closer, even if it means crowding the Crofts more. A few whisper that maybe it's time to raid back. You shift uncomfortably at that. You've never taken a blade to another man, let alone done it over barley. But if someone tried to steal your food, your fire, your life, wouldn't you? One thing is agreed on quickly. Travel is now dangerous. The roads, such as they are, have turned slick and treacherous, perfect for ambushes or sudden accidents. You remember just a few days ago how your feet slipped on a frozen patch outside the croft. Now imagine trying to walk that in the dark, holding a torch and a sword, with frost forming in your eyelashes. Every journey is a gamble. Still, people have to move, messages need sending, alliances have to be maintained. You volunteer to carry one, partly out of obligation and partly because staying still feels worse. So you bundle up, accept the warning looks, and start the 10-mile walk across frozen ridges and ice-glazed glens. The landscape is both beautiful and terrifying. Snow-covered hills stretch endlessly, broken only by skeletal trees and the occasional ruined wall of an older abandoned croft. Ravens perch high above, silent, watching, waiting. You trudge forward, each step a soft crunch, your breath loud in your ears. The cold seeps up from the ground, even through your boots. After an hour your legs are numb. After 2 you stop feeling your fingers. But worse than the cold is the silence. Not the peaceful kind, the waiting kind. Every bend in the trail could hide something, someone. You think you hear voices once carried on the wind, but it's probably just that. Wind. Probably. There's a debate among scholars about how common winter raiding really was in medieval Scotland. Some claim it was rare, madness really, to risk travel and bloodshed when survival was already so precarious. Others argue it happened more often than we think, but wasn't recorded unless it escalated into something bigger. What we do know is that clan rivalries didn't follow a seasonal calendar. Vengeance doesn't thaw with spring. If someone wronged your family in September, you might just return the favour in January. You finally reach the neighbouring settlement. It's eerily quiet. A few buildings still smoke. Charred beams poke through snow like the ribs of a giant beast. People move slowly, clearing wreckage, eyes blank. You deliver the message, help is coming, such as it is, and then stay to help lift a fallen wall, to carry out what's left of someone's possessions. A child cries, and you pretend not to notice how thin his arms are under the blanket. When you return home that evening, no one talks much. You sit by the fire, passing around a bowl of stew that tastes like salt and ash. Everyone's waiting. Waiting for the next attack. Waiting for news. Waiting for winter to end, though that seems the least likely. You sleep with your boots on that night, just in case. The sun doesn't rise so much as it glows faintly behind a thick wall of clouds, the kind of light that makes you question if it's actually day or just a lighter shade of night. You step outside and your boots crunch into frozen earth. Everything's quiet. Too quiet. Which is strange, because this morning you're supposed to march to war. Well, raid, really, but it might as well be war to you. You didn't want to go. Most people didn't. But after the attack on the nearby village, talk spread fast, heated words building like sparks in dry tinder. No one knows who the raiders were for sure, but that hasn't stopped speculation. And when people get scared, they don't look for answers. They look for targets. It's not always the same thing. So now a handful of men, your neighbours, cousins, that guy who smells like boiled turnip and shouts when he's nervous, have decided to strike first. Before they do it again. They say it's self-defence. You're not so sure. But you said yes anyway, because saying no makes you look weak. And looking weak in a winter like this is an invitation to disappear. You wrap your cloak tighter, strap a dull blade to your side and join the others. The snow underfoot is patchy, crusted with ice in places, slick mud in others. The wind is low but biting, slicing into your skin through every careless seam. This isn't the weather for fighting, but that doesn't seem to matter. Vengeance has no chill. The walk takes hours. You follow narrow trails through pine forests that are eerily quiet this time of year. No birds, no rustling, just the crunch of your boots and the occasional grunt from someone up ahead. The air smells like cold bark and damp wool. You wish it smelled like anything else. There's no armour, just cloaks, maybe a buckler, a rusted helmet passed down 2 generations dented from God knows what. Weapons are mismatched. Axes, knives, old swords with notches in the blades, even a farming scythe. One guy brought a club with nails in it. You pretend not to think about how he made it. And yet, you're not a soldier. None of you are. You're farmers, hunters, fishermen, people who normally spend your days trying not to freeze or starve. But now you're warriors, if only for a morning. Because this is how it works here. Clan feuds, old grudges, food disputes, they don't wait for spring. Historically, winter raids weren't common in large-scale warfare. Scotland's weather made sure of that. But in smaller, rural settings, they happened more often than people think. A rival family steals a cow. You steal one back. They burn your shed. You torch their grain. It's a slow, petty, miserable cycle of eye for an eye, stretched across generations. And winter? It just made the stakes higher. You reach the other village at midday, if you can call it a village. It's smaller than yours, maybe 4 or 5 crofts huddled together, smoke drifting weakly from peat fires inside. No defences, no walls, just tired-looking people who probably weren't expecting company. The leader, if you can call him that, raises a hand and suddenly everyone around you is moving, rushing forward, screaming, charging across the snow like demons out of some fever dream. You stand frozen for a second, heart slamming into your ribs like it's trying to escape. Then you run too. There's no choreography, no tactics, just chaos. You rush a croft door, shoulder it open, and find a man barely older than you staring back in shock, holding a wooden spoon like it might help. You raise your knife, but your arm doesn't move. You're frozen, not by cold, but by confusion. This man isn't the enemy. He's you. He's scared, hungry, wearing the same type of cloak. His hands are shaking the same way yours are. Someone shoves past you and knocks him to the ground. You turn away. Outside you hear shouting. A pig squeals. Someone screams, high-pitched and awful. A fire's started, on purpose or by accident, it's not clear. One of your neighbours is kicking open a grain bin, laughing. Another is dragging a chicken under his arm. A third just collapsed in the snow, clutching his leg, blood soaking through his hose. So much for revenge. And then, just as fast as it started, it's over. Your group regathers at the edge of the woods, panting, flushed, muttering half-hearted congratulations or excuses. No one talks about what they saw, or did, or didn't do. You don't speak at all. The march home is quieter. There's a scholarly debate about how these raids were remembered, how memory and myth blend in places like this. Some say stories of heroism were exaggerated, made to make up for the guilt. Others say the guilt was just buried, like so many things in winter. But either way, the people who survived didn't forget. Not really, and neither do you. When you get back, no one cheers. No feast, no bragging. Just the same frostbitten faces, the same sagging crofts. You hand your stolen chicken to your sister without a word. She doesn't ask where it came from. That night you lie awake for hours, watching the fire, listening to it crackle, trying not to hear the sounds again, the screams, the pig, the silence afterward. You're not a soldier, but now you've seen what soldiers do. The castle looms like a frozen bruise on the horizon, its stone towers black against the grey winter sky. You squint at it from the edge of the wood, boots sunk in frostbitten mud, and wonder what it must be like inside. Warm, probably. Dry. Maybe even comfortable. That thought feels almost sinful. Comfort in winter. That's for nobles, not for people like you. Still, it's hard not to imagine it. The flickering torches, the heavy furs, the meat sizzling on spits while someone tunes a harp in the background. Meanwhile, your own version of luxury is a spoon that isn't cracked and a bed that doesn't smell like goat. Castles in medieval Scotland weren't just fortresses. They were ecosystems, insulated worlds where the elite could ride out the worst of the season in relative ease. Not easy, mind you. No one had it easy back then, but certainly easier. If you were lucky enough, or cutthroat enough to be born noble, winter came with options. More food, more fuel, more people to freeze on your behalf. And inside the walls of a keep, things worked a little differently. For one, you had stone walls, thick ones. You may be thinking, you're stone? That sounds cold. And yes, it is cold. But it's also sturdy, windproof, and better at keeping out wolves, raiders, and the kind of draft that makes your teeth ring. The higher up the tower you lived, the less damp it was. The Great Hall, usually on the first or second floor, was the heart of a winter life. A big, echoing room with a central fire pit or a hearth so large you could practically park a cart in it. The ceilings were high, the walls hung with tapestries, some for decoration, some just to keep the wind from whistling between the stones. And yes, you heard that right. Tapestries. Long stretches of woven cloth depicting battles, saints, or just vague, swirly designs, hung from walls like medieval insulation. These things weren't just pretty, they were practical. They absorbed sound, held in heat, and gave bored people something to look at during those endless winter evenings, when everyone's joints ached and the minstrels had run out of songs. The castle dwellers had layers too, of course. Nobody was strutting around in tunics alone, but their clothing was a cut above, literally. Tailored to fit, dyed with expensive pigments, and often lined with fur from animals you've only ever heard of in stories. A noblewoman might wear a gown of wool lined with squirrel, rabbit, or even ermine if she was showing off. Lords wore cloaks heavy with fox fur, trimmed in silver thread. Meanwhile, you're still trying to sew the same patch back onto your sock for the fourth time with a needle made from a chicken bone. And let's not forget beds. Proper beds. 4 posters if you were rich enough, hung with curtains to trap heat. The mattress might be stuffed with feathers, not straw, and the sheets, actual sheets, might even be laundered more than once a season. Bed warmers were a real thing too. Little metal pans filled with hot coals slipped between the sheets before you climbed in. Imagine that. A bed that warms you before you sleep, not one that tries to slowly consume your soul with damp. Meals? Oh, the meals. Winter didn't stop the feast train at a castle. While you're gnawing on boiled oats and mystery stew, the people inside those walls are slicing into roast game, cured hams, wheels of hard cheese, honeyed pastries, and wine that doesn't taste like vinegar. They've got pantries and storehouses, sometimes even ice pits where snow was packed during the cold months to keep things fresh. Sure, the lower ranks, servants, guards, cooks, ate simpler fare, but even that was better than the bark broth slurry you've been trying to pretend is soup. But here's where it gets weird. Even with all that luxury, castles weren't cosy. They were still cold. Stone doesn't heat evenly, and those big halls lost warmth fast. Fires burned constantly, but smoke still built up. Without chimneys, it either hovered near the ceiling or drifted out through narrow slits in the wall. The floors were hard and draughty, often covered in rushes mixed with herbs to mask the smell of whatever had recently died, spilled, or been stepped in. And despite all the servants, people still had to deal with chamber pots. The higher up you lived, the more steps between you and the nearest garderobe, the medieval answer to plumbing, essentially a toilet chute that let waste drop down the castle wall. In winter, this froze. So yes, even nobles had to contend with frozen medieval poop sculptures if they lived high enough up. Bet that wasn't in the fairy tales. Fringe fact. Some castles had entire rooms called warming chambers, built specifically for heat. They were rare, expensive, and often used by the sick or pregnant. The room would be built small, sealed tight, and heated with an oversized hearth. You'd sit there for a while, thawing out before returning to the broader icebox that was the rest of the castle. Kind of like a medieval sauna, minus the eucalyptus and spa music. And of course, castles weren't just homes, they were seats of power. Winter was a time of politics too. Letters sent, alliances whispered, marriages arranged in firelit chambers. The people inside weren't just surviving, they were strategizing, planning for spring, watching their neighbours, listening to rumours that the McHenrys were stealing sheep again, and wondering whether to send men, gold, or just more threatening glances. There's scholarly debate over just how much better castle life really was in winter. Sure, the elite had better tools and food, but disease still ran rampant, fires still smoked, and in some ways, the isolation inside thick walls during the long dark months made the cold feel even more suffocating. You had warmth, yes, but also boredom, and power games, and expectations, and watching your back became just as important as keeping your toes warm. Back in your own croft, you curl up near your small hearth and picture what it must be like inside that towering keep. Maybe the lord is sitting on a high-backed chair, sipping mulled wine. Maybe his lady is wrapped in velvet, listening to a bard sing an old story about fire gods and frozen rivers. Maybe they're not that different from you after all, just better dressed and less smoky. But then the wind howls through the crack in your wall, and you're reminded once again that you're not up there. You're here, with the cold, with the dark, with your patched socks and the memory of a feast you'll never attend. And spring still feels 100 years away. Your neighbour's kid is sick. Again. He's got that same wet cough everyone seems to pick up by midwinter, the kind that rattles through the chest like old bones in a box and doesn't go away, no matter how many hot compresses or whispered prayers get thrown at it. You pass his croft on the way to check the animal pens, and you can hear him hacking from 10 paces off. It's the kind of sound that sticks in your throat just listening to it. Inside, his mother is crouched by the fire, boiling something in a soot-blackened pot. The smell is sharp and herbal, dried meadowsweet and thyme, maybe a bit of rosemary if she's been saving the good stuff. You step through the doorframe just far enough to catch her eye, and she nods without looking up. You don't have to ask how he's doing. The expression on her face says enough. This is medicine in winter, smoke, boiling leaves, and a prayer you don't really believe in. If you're lucky, someone in the village knows more than just folk remedies. Maybe a healer who learned from their grandmother, who learned from hers, passing down tips like rub this on the chest, or don't eat that root unless you want to see demons. But most of the time, it's guesswork, trial, error, and crossed fingers. And in the deep winter, when illness spreads like frost across rooftops, there's a whole lot of error. There's no doctor, not unless you live near a monastery or a very generous noble. Even then, the doctor might be a monk with a basket of dried herbs and a book written in Latin he can't fully read. Most people here rely on what they know, what they've seen work, and what the old women whisper about behind closed doors. And if none of that works, you wait, or you prepare for a burial. Medicine back then was a messy blend of observation, tradition, and outright superstition. Some of it worked. You can't knock the value of willow bark tea for pain, or honey for wound care, but a lot of it was little more than ritual and wishful thinking. People carried charms against fevers, or amulets made of bone, and painted symbols above their doors to ward off spirits. You might find garlic stuffed in a sickbed pillow, or a bowl of water set under the bed to catch the illness as it left the body. It sounds ridiculous now, but if your child was coughing up blood, you'd probably try anything too. And sometimes, that anything got a little weird. In one corner of the highlands, people believed that burning the feathers of a white rooster and inhaling the smoke could cure a winter fever. In others, a black dog seen at your doorstep was a bad omen. Either someone in the house was going to die, or already had and just didn't know it yet. Some folks swore that if you scraped frost off the north side of a standing stone and stirred it into your ale, it would ward off plague. You tried that once. The ale just tasted like rock. But when things got truly bad, people called in the wise woman. Every village had one, maybe two. Not quite a healer, not quite a witch, but definitely someone who existed in that awkward middle space. She knew which roots were poisonous, which herbs helped sleep, and which teas made you see your ancestors in the firelight. Some feared her, others relied on her. She always smelled like smoke and moss and mystery. You're not sure if she was ever young. No one remembers, and while scholars today love to debate the line between folklore and medicine, the people living through it didn't care. If a charm worked, it worked. If it didn't, well, you buried the charm with the body and moved on. There wasn't time for philosophy when the snow was high and your throat was closing up. You remember once, as a child, being so feverish that your mother placed you next to the fire and rubbed goose fat on your chest. Then she wrapped you in furs and said nothing, just sat there staring at the embers like they might offer her some kind of answer. You lived. She never told you what else she tried. And the dead. They didn't get grand funerals in winter. The ground was too hard, the labour too exhausting. Sometimes the bodies were stored until spring, tucked in cold corners, or laid gently in caves, wrapped tightly and covered with evergreens. The first thaw of the year was often met with a grim sort of to-do list. Patch the roof, repair the field walls, bury the dead. This season isn't just cold, it's full of ghosts. Tonight the wind sounds strange, like voices or laughter far away. The older ones in the village say this is the season when the veil is thinnest, that the dead walk beside the living, not with malice necessarily, just watching, hovering, as if they're checking in to see who's next. You brew your own little tonic before bed, dried nettle, a pinch of yarrow, a drop of something the wise woman gave you last fall and told you to only use when the air feels sharp. The taste is bitter. It clings to your throat like tree sap. But you drink it anyway, because your chest has felt tight for 3 days now, and you're starting to hear a rattle in your own breath. After, you sit near the fire and rub your hands together. They're dry, cracked and stained green at the fingertips from mixing herbs. You watch the flames and think of the coughing child, the healer, the dark shapes outside your window. Then you wrap yourself tight in your cloak, tuck your knife under your straw pillow and close your eyes, and hope the medicine works. It starts with a boil, just a small, angry bump on the neck of the shepherd boy who helps tend the goats. No one thinks much of it at first. He says it hurts, sure, but everything hurts in winter. Hands, joints, feelings, so it's nothing special. Then he gets feverish, starts muttering nonsense in his sleep. Then the swelling turns black, and by the next morning, he's dead. That's when the real fear starts. Because you've heard the stories, everyone has. Travellers from the south whispered about it last year. Some said it came from rats, others said from ships, others said it came on the wind, a punishment for sin, or for forgetting the old gods. Nobody really knows, but one thing's always the same in every version. Once it starts, it doesn't stop. Not until the land is quiet, until the woodcutters stop cutting, until the church bells ring and no one comes to pray. The plague doesn't care that it's winter. You'd think the cold might slow it down, freeze it, trap it in the ice. But no. If anything, the close quarters, the stagnant air, and the smoky crofts only make things worse. When people huddle together to keep warm, they also huddle together to spread disease, and there's no running away. The roads are too frozen, the woods too thick, the illness too fast. The day after the shepherd dies, his mother takes ill. Then a cousin, then the boy who helped bury him. By the third day, the croft door is marked with a chalk symbol, smeared and desperate, a cross with lines through it. The village doesn't have a name for what's happening, not officially, but everyone knows. The priest stands in the square and mutters a prayer with too many forgive us, and not enough, here's what to do. He burns a bundle of herbs, juniper maybe, and waves the smoke around like it'll trap the sickness in the air and force it back to wherever it came from. You stand nearby, face wrapped in a scarf, eyes watching the horizon like salvation might be galloping in on horseback. It isn't. People try everything. The wise woman suggests hanging garlic at the door. Someone else swears by crushed nettle brewed into tea. Another family tries fasting, starving the sickness, they say. But the sickness doesn't seem to care. It takes the strong, the weak, the old, the young. It shows up in the middle of the night, in the middle of a prayer, in the middle of a mouthful of broth. Here's the strange thing. Some survive. Even after fevers, even after the buboes swell and break, they're left shaky, scarred, forever changed, but alive. Which makes it even more maddening, because it means maybe there's a way to make it through. But no one knows how. Scholars today still debate what version of plague made it into the Highland villages during the 14th century. Was it truly the Black Death, Yersinia pestis, or a localized epidemic misidentified by terrified chroniclers? Some argue the colder climate would have slowed the fleas and rats needed to spread the disease. Others say the cramped, smoky crofts were more than enough to accelerate it. Either way, something deadly moved through these villages, and winter didn't stop it. You decide to isolate, as much as you can. You drag your bedding further from the hearth, away from the others. You boil your water, wasting precious peat, and refuse to share mugs. You avoid the marked houses. You eat garlic raw until your breath could kill a crow at 10 paces. None of it makes you feel safer, and every time you hear a cough now, your spine stiffens. By the end of the week, 4 families are sick. 2 entire crofts are empty. The snow around the edges of the village is disturbed, shallow graves dug hurriedly in the frozen earth. In one, you recognize the shape of a girl you once traded firewood for dried apples with. Her hand sticks out from the snow. No one goes back to cover it. Eventually the sickness slows. Whether it's because the worst have already been claimed, or because the survivors lock themselves in their homes, no one's sure. But the silence that follows is worse than the coughing. No children laughing, no one calling out over the hill, no dogs barking. Even the wind seems subdued. One night you dream of masks, long-beaked and black-eyed, like bird spirits in the dark. You've never seen one, of course. Those are from the cities, plague doctors, mythical as dragons in a place like this. But still, you see them in the dream, standing in the doorway of your croft, watching. You wake up drenched in sweat, unsure if it's from fever or fear. People recover, but they don't come back the same. Some walk slower, some don't speak much anymore. Others just stare at the fire like they're waiting for something. A few leave, what's left of their families packed onto sledges, and disappear into the trees. You suspect you'll never see them again. Eventually the village tries to move on. Someone suggests a prayer day. Another says to burn the bedding. A third just shrugs and starts patching the roof of his croft. Life goes on. Not because it should, but because it has to. You pass the empty croft sometimes. They've gone still, snow packed against the doors, smoke never rising from the chimneys. One still has a scarf flapping from a window. You don't know why, and you're not brave enough to find out. By now you've forgotten what it was like before the boil, before the silence, before you started holding your breath every time someone sneezed. And worst of all, winter's not even over yet. You find yourself leaning in closer to the fire these days, not just for warmth, but for something else. Distraction. The kind of distraction that can take you, for a little while, out of your aching bones, your hollow stomach, and the growing list of neighbours you'll never speak to again. And that's where the stories come in. Tonight, Like most nights now, the hearth becomes a kind of stage. The room is dim, shadows stretching tall along the croft walls, and everyone's pulled in close, wrapped in cloaks and ragged blankets, shoulders pressed together. The firelight flickers across tired faces, casting everyone in gold and ghost. Outside, the wind scratches at the door like it wants to be let in. Inside, someone clears their throat and begins, "Have I ever told you about the Kelpie of Loch Dorsh?" And just like that, you're gone. Because here, in the thick of winter, storytelling isn't just entertainment, it's survival. A balm for the brain, a blanket for the mind. The tales stretch longer in the cold months, embroidered with extra details, extra flourishes. There's no rush, nothing else to do. So why not linger on the part where the hero gets swallowed whole, or where the trickster ties a demon's shoelaces together and throws him in the river? Some stories are funny, absurd tales of talking cows and foolhardy shepherds. Some are tragic. Some so old no one remembers how they end, so the storyteller just makes something up on the spot and no one argues. The best stories are true, or at least claim to be. A cousin who saw a selkie washing her hair on the rocks. An uncle who met a fairy woman in the woods and came home with white hair and no memory. You've heard them all a dozen times, but it doesn't matter. You'll gladly hear them a dozen more. Oral tradition in medieval Scotland wasn't a hobby. It was a lifeline. The Gaelic bards, the Seanchedern, were trained from childhood to memorise hundreds of tales, genealogies, poems, and historical events. Some even claimed they could recite the lineage of kings going back to the gods themselves. Whether that's true or not, who knows? But their stories had power. They passed knowledge, preserved culture, warned against danger. In winter, when the landscape tried to swallow you whole, these stories reminded you that someone somewhere had been through worse, and maybe even survived. And every now and then one tale cuts deeper than the others, like the one you're hearing tonight as the storyteller leans closer to the fire, his voice low and steady. It's about a village not unlike your own. A harsh winter, too long and too cruel. People starving, falling ill. But one night, a child disappears, then another, and they say it's the work of a creature from the north, the Nukkalavi, skinless and steaming, riding over frozen rivers in search of the weak. You shiver as he speaks. Not because you believe it, not exactly, but because part of you does. Or maybe just wants to. It's easier to blame monsters than the cold. And then the storyteller's voice softens. But the people of the village, he says, they did not give in. They burned fire all night. They carved runes on the lintels. They stood together, even when they were afraid to pause. And when spring finally came, they were still here. It's not the best story, not the most exciting, but it's what people need tonight. A reminder that survival is possible, that even the worst winters end. There's a strange intimacy to these nights. Everyone leaning in, whispering, remembering. Some add their own verses. Others laugh in the wrong places. Children fall asleep mid-story, heads on their mother's laps, eyes fluttering shut as a warrior slays his final beast. One old man, nearly deaf, insists on telling a story he's already told 3 nights in a row. No one stops him. It's comforting, in its own way. Like hearing a song you once loved, even if the notes are wrong. You take your turn eventually. Not because you're brave or bold or particularly good at it, but because stories are shared, not hoarded. You tell the one your grandmother told you, the one about the woman who baked bread for the spirits living under the stone bridge and woke one morning to find her cupboards full. You don't believe in bridge spirits, probably. But as the words leave your mouth and the faces lean toward you, eyes wide, mouths open, something warm coils in your chest. This is why the stories matter. Here's a little-known historical quirk. Many tales told during winter were deliberately long-winded, not just to fill the hours, but to slow down time. There was a belief, especially in older, pre-Christian traditions, that the cold months were spiritually dangerous. That time could slip, that the boundaries between moments, or even worlds, grew thin. Stories anchored you. They kept the night from creeping in too far. And beyond that, they gave people purpose. Children learned their heritage. Adults remembered lost loved ones. Elders passed on lessons through metaphors, warnings buried in fable. Don't go out after dark, they'd say, or the washerwoman will mistake you for the dead. Don't whistle in the wind, they'd warn, or it might answer back. Tonight, after the fire burns low and the last story fades, no one speaks for a while. Just the quiet crackle of peat, the occasional sniffle, the rustle of shifting limbs as people settle down to sleep. It's late. The kind of late where time doesn't seem real anymore. You lie back staring at the ceiling beams above you, blackened with smoke and age. You think about the tales you heard, the faces you saw around the fire. You think about the Nukkalevi, about the Selkie bride, about the old man who swore he spoke to a standing stone and it answered him in perfect Gaelic. Maybe you don't believe all of it, but you believe in the firelight, in the warmth of voices, in the way a story can pull you out of the cold and hold you for a while. And that's enough. Something's been skulking around the edge of the croft. You haven't seen it, not clearly, but you've heard it. At first you told yourself it was just the wind. The wind makes all kinds of noises in winter, groans across the moor, low whistles through dry stone walls, soft sighs slipping under the thatch. But this sound wasn't like that. This was closer, heavier, a slow crunch of snow, a sniffing sound by the door, a soft scrape of claw or hoof against wood. It was enough to keep you awake last night, curled under your cloak, blade tucked tight in hand, staring at the door like it might shudder open at any moment. And this morning? Tracks. Not clear ones, just broken, scattered depressions in the snow that weave around the croft and vanish into the trees. Could have been a fox, could have been a dog, could have been something else. Predators don't hibernate here, not all of them. And in the harshest part of winter, when prey is scarce, and starvation gnaws at even the cleverest beasts, they come closer to the hearth, closer to the smoke, closer to you. You've always been told about the wolves, not in bedtime story kind of ways, but in real terms, where they travel, how they move, what they sound like when they hunt. Most winters they keep their distance, sticking to the deeper forests, picking off stragglers or raiding sheep pens that aren't well guarded. But this year has been bad. Food is low, and wolves, like people, get desperate. You remember vaguely hearing about a man 2 villages over who lost his youngest to a pack. It was dark. They were returning from the river, hauling back buckets of ice-thick water, and the child had wandered a few steps ahead. No one saw what happened, just blood in the snow and silence afterward. By the time the men lit torches and ran out into the woods, whatever had done it was long gone. Of course, it might not have been wolves. Some say it's not just animals out there in the dark. You've heard the stories, half in jest, half in warning, about creatures that hunt in winter. Not beasts, not men, something in between. There's the Baubun Sith, the winter woman in green who lures men from their fires and drinks them dry in the snow. There's the Fuath, water spirits that rise from frozen locks when the ice cracks just right. There's the Wolva, not a werewolf exactly, more of a hairy, man-shaped thing with yellow eyes and a strange kindness that shows up at the worst possible time, or the best, depending on who's telling it. Of course none of that is real, right? But that doesn't stop you from fastening the door extra tight, doesn't stop you from keeping the fire higher than usual, and it definitely doesn't stop you from listening, really listening to the noises outside tonight. In reality, the biggest predator here probably is the wolf. Grey wolves were common in Scotland for centuries, and they thrived in winter. They hunted in packs, moved silently, and had the uncanny ability to vanish into the trees like smoke. They were feared, yes, but also respected, powerful, intelligent, and, depending on the region, even admired. Some clans adopted them as symbols, others used their pelts in rituals. Some even believed wolves were reincarnated warriors, returned to patrol the glens by moonlight. But they weren't the only danger in the dark. Sometimes the predators weren't animals at all. There were thieves too, raiders, outcasts, bandits who'd been driven from their own villages, now living rough in the forest, surviving off whatever they could steal or kill. They didn't howl like wolves, but they were just as deadly, especially when driven by cold and hunger. Sometimes they came in ones and twos, sometimes in groups, and unlike animals, they knew how to pick locks, how to wait, how to make the dogs go quiet, which raises a thought you've been trying to avoid all day. What if what you heard wasn't a wolf? Tonight, you set out a circle of firewood around the edge of the croft, dry branches from the brush pile, arranged so they'll snap if stepped on. It's not much, but it's something. You place your blade within reach again. You pile extra peat on the fire. The smoke curls up into the rafters, warm and choking. You don't care. You want the light. You need it. Just before bed, someone tells a story. Of course they do. It's an old one, about a spirit that roams during the coldest nights of the year, looking for places where the fire's gone out. It knocks 3 times on the door, and if no one answers, it comes in anyway. The moral, they say, is to never let your fire die. Keep it burning. Always. Even if the peat runs low, even if the smoke hurts your lungs, even if it's just a tiny ember glowing in the dark. You think it's superstition, obviously, and yet you toss on another brick of peat before curling up near the wall. There's a scholarly theory about why so many winter legends across cultures feature shapeshifters and animal-human hybrids. One idea is that these creatures represent the fear of losing your own humanity, of becoming something wild under pressure. Hunger can turn a man feral, cold can drive him mad, and winter, above all, strips people down to their most basic selves. Maybe that's why wolves loom so large in the stories, because the line between beast and man, in winter, it's thin as ice. You drift off slowly, one eye open, ears tuned to every creak and gust of wind. The fire hisses, spitting softly. Someone nearby snores. Outside, you think you hear something. A step, a breath, number, just the wind. Probably. Rain again. Not the soft kind that makes you think of spring, but the miserable sideways kind that soaks you through before you've even stepped off the threshold. It's cold, needling, and somehow manages to find every gap in your layers, the collar of your cloak, the hole in your boot, that one weak seam under your arm that you swear wasn't there yesterday. You wrap your cloak tighter, pull the hood low, and try not to think about the fact that you're already damp and you haven't even made it to the goat pen. This is the worst kind of winter day. No soft snow, no crunch of frost, just wet. Cold and wet. The ground is half-thawed, the sky a colourless smear, and every step you take sucks at your boots with that familiar soul-deep squelch. The path between crofts is a muddy soup, slick with manure, old straw, and whatever leaked out of the midden pile last week. Your foot slips, you curse, you do it again. And this is where the real danger lies, not in the drama of blizzards or the growl of wolves, but in the slow, steady erosion of everything. Your patience, your warmth, your footing, your clothes, especially your clothes. Your wool tunic has been damp for 3 days now. At first it was just the hem, caught in a puddle or dripped on while hauling buckets, then the sleeves, then the back, now it's all of it. A kind of clammy second skin that clings in the wrong places and saps heat from you, like it's being paid to do so. You can't dry it by the fire. There's no room, and even if there were, it would take hours. Wool doesn't dry in winter, it just sort of transitions from wet to less wet and back again. That's the thing about medieval clothing. It's all natural fibres. Wool, linen, maybe some leather, and once they're soaked, they hold on to that moisture like a grudge. You can wring them out, hang them, even lay them on a warm rock if the sun ever comes back. Spoiler, it won't. Still, they stay damp. And damp clothes in winter mean only one thing: sickness. You felt it creeping in. An ache behind your eyes, the heaviness in your limbs, the way your hands tremble even when they're near the fire. It's not a fever. Not yet. Just a warning. A whisper from your body saying, maybe stay dry next time, but there won't be a next time. This is just how it is. Someone in the village did try to make a sort of waterproof cloak once, soaked it in tallow, beeswax, and a few herbs for luck. It repelled water for exactly one afternoon before melting near the fire and leaving him smelling like rancid bacon. Still, he wears it anyway. Says the stink keeps the goats from biting him. Slipping in the mud is more common now. A young woman broke her wrist yesterday trying to haul water back from the stream. Another man twisted his ankle fetching firewood from the far slope. You don't heal quickly in this weather. Wounds stay open longer, infection sets in faster, bandages rot, and you don't have the luxury of rest. So you limp, you favour the bad arm, you grit your teeth and hope the bone knits properly, even without splints or salves. And then there's the water. Everywhere. Seeping into your boots. Pooling in the corner of the croft where the thatch is thinning. Dripping from the rafters in steady, soul-sucking plinks. Your bedding is damp. Your socks are damp. Your bread, somehow, is also damp. And no one knows how that happened because it was stored in a sealed pot. You find yourself dreaming of dryness. Not warmth, not food. Just that delicious feeling of a blanket warmed by the sun, a shirt that smells like nothing at all. You fantasize about lying in tall, dry grass under a blue sky. But you push the thought away. It's dangerous. Delusions like that lead to mistakes. You can't afford mistakes. Here's a strange fact you once heard from an old tanner. Leather shrinks when it gets wet, and then hardens if it dries too fast. That's why your boots, soaked for days, feel tighter than ever. That, and the soles are worn so thin you can feel every rock. You wrap your feet in spare wool, but it only delays the inevitable. Blisters, sores, and eventually frostbite. You've seen it happen. Black toes, flesh sloughing off. No one talks about it, but everyone knows someone who's lost a foot. Scholars often debate the daily toll of medieval winters, not just the big sweeping dangers like famine or war, but the constant barrage of small cumulative miseries. Some argue that the psychological strain was as deadly as the physical one, that the persistent damp, cold and discomfort broke people down slowly until they stopped fighting it, until they simply faded. You believe it. You see it in the eyes of your neighbours. They don't look angry or sad, just worn, hollowed out by too many wet days, too many spoiled meals, too many sleepless nights lying awake, counting drips from the ceiling. No one even flinches anymore when something goes wrong. They just add it to the list. This afternoon you try to dry your shirt. You take it off, carefully, quickly, trying not to expose yourself to the full bite of the air, and hang it by the fire. You rub your arms for warmth, teeth chattering, watching the steam rise from the wool as it hisses. For a second you wonder if it might catch fire. You almost hope it does. At least then you'd have an excuse to ask someone for a new one. Eventually you put it back on, still damp, maybe slightly less than before, but it's too late now. Your skin is already cold again, and the ache behind your eyes is sharper. You lie down near the hearth, curling your legs under you, trying to fold into yourself like a blanket that doesn't work anymore. And you think, not about spring, that's too far away. Just about tomorrow, and whether your boots will still hold. The children don't complain, not out loud. They're too used to it. Their faces stay serious, small mouths pressed into thin lines, cheeks raw with wind and cold. They shuffle from chore to chore with that quiet, watchful focus that kids shouldn't have yet. Not really. But when the days are short and the nights are colder than the grave, childhood becomes something practical. You don't get to play when your fingers are cracked and bleeding. You don't get to dream when your dreams have frostbite. The youngest ones still giggle sometimes. You hear it now and then, muffled under scarves, behind a haystack, in that tight moment before bedtime when someone makes a face or lets out a fart loud enough to echo off the croft wall. But even those laughs feel stolen, like they weren't supposed to happen, the kind of joy you apologise for afterward. Winter isn't kind to kids, that's just the reality. You see it in their feet, bare, swollen, wrapped in layers of damp wool that's more whole than sock. You see it in their hands, chapped, red, shaking when they try to carry a bucket or hold a needle. And worst of all, you see it in their eyes, older than they should be. The brightness has faded under weeks of grey sky and grey porridge. You remember being that small, the sting of cold in your lungs during early morning chores, the terrifying crunch of ice underfoot, knowing a fall meant bruises, or worse. The shame of wetting yourself in the middle of the night because you were too scared to go outside in the dark where wolves and worse might be watching. Chores don't stop for age. Children haul water, carry firewood, feed the animals, what's left of them. They collect dung too, drying it into patties for fuel, their tiny hands shaping frozen waste into lifelines. No one spares them from the work because everyone's struggling. You do your part or you don't eat. It's as simple as that. And yet, there's a weird resilience in them. They don't question the misery. They adapt to it. You watch one little girl now, no more than 7, tucking scraps of straw into the gaps in the wall near the goat pen. Her fingers move fast, automatic, like she's done it 100 times. Maybe she has. She whistles a tune as she works, off-key and tuneless, but it floats above the mud like something defiant. A group of older boys has gathered near the edge of the village. They're kicking a lump of ice back and forth, half-heartedly pretending it's a game. One of them laughs, then trips, then punches the one who laughed. And just like that, it's a scuffle. Not out of anger, really. Just out of the need to move, to feel, to remind themselves they're not just frozen statues waiting for the thaw. Children die more easily in the cold. That's the ugly truth. They're smaller, burn through calories faster, and their bodies can't take the same punishment as adults. In some villages, people would weigh the grain and ration extra to the little ones, not out of softness but strategy. Children are the future after all. Lose too many and your village dies with them. But not every place had that luxury, and when the food ran out, it was the smallest bowls that got emptied first, quietly, without ceremony. A mother might give her child the broth and go without. A father might tell his son that the stew was better today, even though there was nothing left in the pot. These were acts of love, but they were also desperate bargains. Fringe fact: some medieval folk believed that if a child died in winter, their spirit would linger until spring, trapped by the frozen ground, waiting for the earth to thaw so they could pass on properly. That's why, in certain parts of the highlands, you'd see dolls left on the edge of the moor, or tiny bundles of cloth hidden under trees. Offerings, apologies, proof that someone still remembered. You don't talk about the children who don't make it. No one does. One day they're coughing by the fire, the next, they're gone. Sometimes the body gets buried, sometimes not. Sometimes the grief is too raw to name. A woman will sit by the hearth for 3 days straight, not moving. A man will chop wood until his hands bleed, then keep chopping. And still the other children carry on. That's the strangest part. They adapt like moss on stone. One girl lost 2 fingers to frostbite last winter. She still helps turn the churn. One boy walks with a limp after falling on the ice last year. No healer, no splint, just time and a walking stick. He doesn't complain, he just walks slower. There's one game they play at night if the fire's warm enough and the elders aren't scowling. It's a kind of storytelling contest. One child starts a tale, a haunted glen, a river ghost, a knight who lost his sword, and the next child has to add to it. You watch them now, huddled close, eyes wide as one boy tells of a hag who lives beneath the snow and steals voices. The others lean in, they shiver, then laugh, then look nervously at the door. You suppose it's a kind of magic, the way they can still imagine even in all this. It keeps them human. Keeps you human too, just watching. There's debate among historians about how children were treated in medieval Scottish villages, whether they were seen as precious or simply smaller versions of adults. The answer seems to be both. They were loved, yes, but love didn't mean protection. It meant preparation, teaching them to survive, to endure, to carry the torch when the elders couldn't anymore. Tonight, as the wind howls through the cracks in the roof, you lie close to the fire. The smallest children are already asleep, curled like kittens in corners, breath visible in the cold air. You listen to the quiet, to the crackle of peat, to the half-whispered stories still passing between older siblings. You watch a boy cover his sister with an extra scrap of cloth, tucking it around her without a word. And in that moment you feel something rare. Not warmth, not comfort, but hope. Sunday morning arrives in a hush. Not that the wind has stopped. It's still rattling at the shutters like it wants to remind you who's in charge. But something about today is different. Calmer. You can feel it in the way people move. A bit slower, quieter, as if they're holding their breath. Not out of fear this time, but something else. Reverence. Or maybe obligation. This is the one day of the week that everyone in the village tries to clean up a bit. That means brushing the soot off your cloak, wiping the mud off your boots with whatever scrap of cloth isn't already soaked through, and attempting to look like you haven't spent the last 6 nights sharing a corner of the croft with a coughing pig. You smooth your tunic, tie your belt a little tighter, and step outside into the cold. It hits you like a slap, sharp and immediate, but you don't flinch. It's Sunday. You're expected to walk into that cold with purpose. The chapel is half a mile away, if you can call it a chapel. It's more of a stone box with a crooked roof, and one tiny window that's so crusted over with frost it might as well be a wall. Still it stands. It hasn't blown over, burned down or crumbled, and in this climate that alone feels like a small miracle. As you trudge through the slush and crusted snow, you pass others making their way too, bundled in layers, heads down against the wind, faces grim but determined. The older ones lean on sticks. The younger ones whisper jokes behind scarf-covered mouths. A few carry candles to light once inside, but the wind keeps blowing them out. Still, they try. That's the thing about this day. Even when the world is frozen solid, you try. Inside the chapel, the air's no warmer than outside. The walls are bare, the stone pews colder than death, and the smell of wet wool and peat smoke follows everyone in like a second congregation. You find your usual spot near the back, close to a draughty corner where the wind sneaks in through a crack in the mortar. Your feet are already numb, but that's fine. You're not here for comfort. The priest arrives. He's not young, not old, just tired. He wears a simple robe patched at the hem, and his hands shake slightly as he opens the worn book resting on the altar. He doesn't speak loudly, doesn't have to. The room is so silent that even the rustle of his pages sounds holy. He begins the prayers, the Latin words rough on his tongue, and everyone murmurs along, not because they understand necessarily, but because they remember. That's what religion is here in winter. Not grand enlightenment, just memory, repetition, something to hold on to. There's no sermon today, just readings, some prayers, and a moment of silence for the dead. It lasts longer than usual. Too many names, too many empty spaces on the benches, and yet there's something comforting in the ritual, something steady. In a season where the sky forgets to shine and the ground won't give, faith becomes a kind of anchor. Not hope, exactly. Not joy. Just structure. A reason to get up, to wash your face, to light a candle and pretend that someone somewhere is listening. That doesn't mean everyone believes. Some people are here because they're scared not to be. Others because it's tradition. A few, like you, because the idea of a place where things are supposed to make sense, where there's order and meaning and forgiveness, feels better than sitting at home listening to the rafters creak. And then there are the ones who carry older beliefs, quietly, in the background. You see them glance at the standing stones on the way home. You notice the small bundle of herbs tied to the chapel doorframe, the ones the priest always removes but never mentions. There's still room for both kinds of faith out here, old gods and new saints, fire spirits and martyrs. If it helps someone survive the winter, no one argues too loudly, fringe fact. Some Highlanders continued blending pagan customs with Christian ones for centuries, lighting candles to Bridget in the chapel, then leaving milk outside for her other self, carving crosses on doorways and then hanging rowan branches over the lintel for protection. Dual loyalty, just in case. After the service, people linger a bit. No one's in a hurry to return to cold crofts and unfinished chores. They talk softly, share news, swap goods, eggs for kindling, honey for herbs. A neighbour hands you a twist of cloth with a bit of dried apple inside. You nod your thanks. You don't ask for it, and they don't say why. That's just what people do here, on Sundays. Tiny acts of mercy. Faith in human form. Back home you sit by the fire and unwrap the apple. It's hard, chewy, sweet in a way that makes your jaw ache. You close your eyes while you chew, pretending it's a feast. The rest of the day passes quietly. No hard labour, no hunting, just small tasks. Mending clothes, braiding rope, sharpening tools. Someone reads aloud, someone else hums a tune. It's not happiness, but it's something close. There's a scholarly debate about the true role of religion in rural medieval life. Some argue it was imposed, a tool of control and guilt. Others believe it was a comfort, a shield against the constant grind of hunger and hardship. But here, in your village, it seems simpler. Church is the only place where silence doesn't feel empty, where repetition feels safe, where you can say the same words you said last week and believe they'll still matter next week too. As night falls, the wind returns, fiercer than before. It wails down the chimney and rattles the shutter loose again. You fasten it with twine and sit back down. The fire crackles, a candle flickers. You whisper a prayer under your breath, not because you're devout, but because you need something to say into the dark. And when you lie down, your hands pressed together under your chin, you find yourself thinking about heaven. Not the grand cathedral kind, just a room that's warm, a roof that doesn't leak, bread with butter, and sleep without shivering. If that place exists, you'd go tomorrow, even barefoot. You wake to a sound that shouldn't be there. Horses. Not just one, but several. Hooves muffled but distinct in the slushy snow outside the croft. You sit up fast, heart already halfway to your throat, and glance toward the door. The others in your household have heard it too. You can see it in the way everyone stiffens, in the slow, silent movement of hands reaching for knives, for staves, for anything remotely sharp. No one speaks. No one needs to. You all remember. The door doesn't burst open. Instead, there's a knock. Just once. Slow and heavy. A warning. Or maybe a courtesy. Either way, it doesn't feel friendly. You pull the door open with numb fingers and come face to face with a soldier, or at least someone dressed like one. He's wrapped in layers of leather and mail, a cloak bearing a faded crest you don't recognize, mud crusted halfway up his legs. Behind him are 3 more men on horseback, similarly dressed, eyes sharp under thick hoods, and behind them, you notice with a sinking feeling, are more horses, a whole line stretching back toward the trees, armed, organised, cold as stone. They say they're just passing through, just checking on the borderlands, just making sure no one's harbouring criminals or hiding stolen livestock. But you know what this is? A reminder. A reminder that even in winter, even in a storm, even when everything inside you aches, politics doesn't sleep. This is life on the edge, the border between Scotland and England, where every frost-bitten hill has hosted a dozen battles, where loyalties shift like snowdrifts, and where being in the wrong place at the wrong time means everything. These aren't raiders, they're official, knights, or something close to it. They're under orders, and that makes them twice as dangerous. You offer them what you have, some dried fish, a bowl of broth, space by the fire. You don't ask if they've come from a garrison or if they're part of a larger campaign. You definitely don't ask who they're looking for. You just smile and keep your eyes down. You've seen what happens to villagers that ask questions. They stay longer than they need to, poking through your stores, inspecting your tools, even eyeing your animals like they might requisition them. One of them leans down and picks up your younger brother's carved wooden toy and turns it over in his gloved hand like it's evidence of something. Then he drops it in the ash. You don't move. Eventually they leave. They say thank you, but it sounds more like a threat than a farewell. One of them spits into the snow. Another lights a pipe with a coal from your hearth. Then they're gone, hoofprints turning the white road to mud behind them. The door closes. Everyone exhales. No one talks about how close that was, how much worse it could have been. Because the truth is, winter doesn't protect you from war. If anything, it complicates it. And for villages like yours, caught between lords and kings, between counties and crowns, winter makes you vulnerable. Too frozen to flee, too poor to bribe, too exposed to hide. There's always been tension along the Scottish borders. For centuries, these lands have shifted back and forth, claimed, reclaimed, raided and taxed by whoever had the bigger sword that decade. In winter, the fighting slowed, sure, but it never stopped. Skirmishes still happened, spies still moved through forests, armies still crossed the moors, wrapped in furs and fueled by whatever they could take. And in places like this, loyalty is a flexible concept. You swear to whichever lord is nearest, or the one who hasn't stolen your sheep, or the one whose soldiers don't set fire to your grain store. Some years it's the Scots, some years the English, some years it's no one at all, just your village, alone in the snow, hoping no banners appear on the horizon. There's debate among historians about how much the average peasant really cared about the greater politics of the time. Did they follow the throne wars? Did they track which cousin of which king had declared themselves rightful ruler this week? Probably not. Not in detail. But they felt the consequences. They lived in the echo of every conflict. Every shift in power brought new taxes, new expectations, new threats. You remember your father telling you about the last war, how soldiers came through with torches and burned every barn, then moved on without looking back, how the village rebuilt with help from no one, just hands, just wood, just time. Then it happened again 5 years later. So now, when you see men on horses in winter, you don't ask questions, you offer food, you stay quiet, and you count your animals afterward. The next day, you walk the edge of the woods and find hoofprints where they shouldn't be, a bit of cloth snagged on a branch. You wonder if they were looking for someone specific, a fugitive, a deserter, or maybe just a reason to do something. Soldiers in winter have time on their hands, and when soldiers get bored, villages burn. Still, there's something almost laughable about it, as if the war between kings could possibly be worse than the war you're already fighting, with cold, with hunger, with illness, as if politics matter when your hands are too frozen to hold a spoon. Back at the croft, you help your brother retrieve his toy from the ashes. The wood is scorched, one side blackened. He doesn't cry. He just turns it over, rubs the soot off, and sets it on the windowsill like a sentinel. You look out past it, at the grey sky, the hard earth, the distant road, now empty, and you wonder how long it will stay that way. You wake up starving, not just hungry, not just my stomach rumbled hungry, starving. The kind of gnawing, dizzy, bone-deep emptiness that makes your whole body feel like a hollow log. You roll over slowly, not because you're tired, though you are, but because moving too fast makes your head spin. It's been 3 days since you've had a full bowl of anything. The oats are nearly gone, the salt fish gone, the turnips, sprouted or rotted. You don't even look at the grain bin anymore, there's no point. This is the kind of hunger that turns time into a joke. You stop counting hours, you start counting heartbeats, counting swallows, counting how many more mornings your legs will carry you before they just don't. Winter always brings hunger, but this year's worse. Longer, colder, wetter. Everything that could go wrong has. The summer's harvest was poor. The rain came early, and now, in the dead grip of February, there's nothing left to stretch, nothing left to ration, just one or two hidden stores, jealously guarded by people too ashamed, or too scared, to admit they planned better than everyone else. No one says the word, not out loud, but you're all thinking it. Famine. It's not a stranger here. It visits now and then. Quiet, deliberate, cruel. You've heard stories from your grandparents. You've heard songs about it. Soft, eerie tunes about families disappearing one by one, about whole villages vanishing in the snow. You always thought they were exaggerated, until now. Today, you chew bark. Literally. You strip it from a birch tree near the edge of the field, shave off the outer layer, and scrape at the softer pulp beneath. It doesn't taste like anything, just fibres and regret. But it gives your mouth something to do, something to pretend it's eating. The children cry more now. They try not to. They hide in corners or under the table, muffling their sobs with hands or scraps of cloth. But it's impossible to be quiet when your belly is cramping and your body doesn't understand why it's being punished. And the adults? They just get quieter. A kind of slow, collective silencing. People move slower, talk less, smile never. There's no energy left for anything but the basics. Walking, watching, waiting. You measure strength in footsteps now, in whether someone can still carry a log or whether they sit down halfway and don't get back up. You share what's left. You have to, even if it means less for you, especially if it means less for you. Because you know what happens when people stop sharing. There was a man last week, broad shoulders, fast walker, always whistling while he carried buckets. One night he didn't show up for dinner. Next morning someone checked his croft. Empty. No sign of him. The fire burned down to ash. But the storage pit? Open. Cleaned out. Gone. No one talks about it. But you all know. He left with the food. Maybe to trade. Maybe to run. Maybe just because he couldn't watch everyone else fade away while he had something left. It's hard to say if it was cowardice or mercy. And then one night, the whisper begins. Low. Careful. Like it's being passed between ghosts. Cannibalism. No one says it directly, no one accuses, but you see the glances, the unease, the way someone starts sleeping closer to their children, the way knives are kept on now, not near. It's not happening. You think. You hope. But the stories are there. Stories of long winters, of desperate households, of strange stews that didn't smell quite right. Fringe fact, there are actual medieval Scottish records that hint at such acts during extreme famines, though they're usually couched in vague language. Unholy consumption. Turning on one's kin. Never quite naming it, but never denying it either. A shadow in the margins of history. You tell yourself it won't come to that. Not here. Not with these people. But the truth is, the line between civilized and desperate is thinner than anyone wants to admit. One more week of this, maybe two, and who knows? You try to hunt, of course you do, but the traps are empty. Nothing moves out there anymore. Even the rabbits have vanished. You swear you saw a crow a few days ago, circling low, but even that's gone now. Some say the animals have fled to higher ground. Others say they know when death is coming, and they don't want to be part of it. There's a scholarly argument about whether the great famines of the Middle Ages affected the highlands in the same way they did southern Europe. Some historians claim the clan's rugged independence and subsistence farming protected them better. Others say that isolation made it worse, that when the food ran out there was no lord with extra stores, no town market with dried grain, just the cold, just the snow, just you. Tonight someone finds an old bundle of dried peas hidden under a floorboard. It's dusty, brittle, probably forgotten since the last bad winter. It might not even be edible anymore. You boil it anyway. The smell is strange, earthy, musty, a bit sour. But no one hesitates. You share it. Small spoonfuls each. It doesn't fill you, not even close, but it stops the cramping for a little while. That's the best you can hope for now. You lie down beside the fire, head spinning. You think about food constantly now. The feel of bread between your teeth, butter melting on hot oats, a haunch of venison cooked over flames, skin blistering and spitting fat. You imagine it so clearly you can taste it. Then the hunger comes crashing back and you realise your mouth is full of nothing but spit. Outside it's snowing again. Soft flakes, quiet and relentless. It should be beautiful. But all you can see is one more day of frost that won't let go. One more day of waiting for something, anything to grow. You see the first green thing in months and it stops you cold. Not a tree or a bush or anything dramatic, just a small patch of moss tucked beneath a stone near the well. At first, you think it's a trick of the light, maybe some kind of lichen or even mould, but no, it's green. Bright, living, impossible green. You crouch down and run your fingers over it, and it's soft, spongy, alive in a way you'd almost forgotten the world could be. You don't call anyone over. You just stay there for a moment, your knees in the mud, breathing in the scent of damp earth. It's barely anything, really. A scrap. But it feels like a message. A promise. Not yet, but soon. Spring isn't here, not quite, but it's coming. You can feel it in the air, heavier now, less biting. The wind still howls at night, but there's something new in its voice, something softer. During the day, the snow is melting in uneven patches, revealing the wreckage beneath. Flattened straw, twisted roots, bones. The land looks bruised and exhausted, but it's starting to exhale. The sky even looks different. The endless grey is broken in places, replaced by slivers of pale blue that make you squint. The sun is back, barely, but enough to cast shadows again. And that first shadow you see, long and stretched out across the snow, nearly makes you cry. You'd forgotten what it felt like to see yourself in full daylight. The animals feel it too. The goats are louder. The chickens, what's left of them, are fussing more in their coop. You even hear a bird, just once, just a few notes. But it was there, and you look up from your chores like someone slapped you. Everyone else hears it too. You all freeze, heads turned toward the trees, listening like it's the voice of God. This is the part of winter people never write songs about. The in-between. It's not yet spring, but winter has cracked. And now the world is thawing, slowly, awkwardly, like a drunk man getting to his feet. And just like that man, it's a little dangerous. Mud sucks at your boots, ice melts during the day, then freezes slick again at night. Roofs drip constantly. Puddles form inside the crofts. Fires struggle against the damp, but you don't care, because it's changing. This is when the village begins to stretch. People leave their crofts more often now. They check the edges of the fields, turn over the soil with sticks and fingers, testing its softness. It's not ready yet, but it will be. And after months of nothing, just will be, is enough to stir something inside you. Today you help clear out the old grain store. It smells like rot and dust and shame. Most of what's inside is useless. Mildewed sacks, cracked barrels, mould so thick it looks like fur. But a few scraps can be salvaged, dried in the sun and burned as fuel. It's a mess, but it's a spring mess, and that makes all the difference. You catch yourself humming, just for a second. You don't even know what the tune is. Something your mother used to sing maybe, but it escapes before you can stop it. You half expect someone to glare at you, like they did in the worst weeks. But no one does. A few even smile. Not wide smiles. No one remembers how to do that anymore, but small ones. Cracks in the stone. There's still hunger. Of course there is. The stores are still low, but now the ground is soft enough to dig for roots. Wild garlic, nettles, bitter things, but fresh things. You gather what you can and bring it back in your apron like a treasure. That night's stew is thin, but it tastes alive. A bite of nettle between your teeth, and you could almost weep from the brightness of it. After so many months of grey mush, even bitterness feels like a feast. There's a ritual tonight. Not official, not church-sanctioned, just something the villagers do when the first green things appear. It's quiet. No drums, no singing. Just a shared walk to the standing stone at the top of the ridge. You bring offerings, dried herbs, a twist of hair, a pebble warmed by the hearth. You lay them at the base of the stone and whisper a hope. You're not sure what yours is. You start to say something for a good harvest, then change your mind. For warmth? Too obvious. In the end, you just whisper, "Please." Not even sure who you're whispering it to. Some say the stone is a relic from the old gods. Others think it's just a marker, a grave, a piece of history no one remembers. But standing there, as the sky turns gold at the edges and the wind smells just slightly of earth instead of ice, you feel it pulse. Or maybe that's your own heartbeat. Hard to tell. There's a scholarly theory that these small local rituals, offerings, stone visits, even just shared meals, were the psychological glue that held communities together during the hardest months. More effective than prayer, more honest than politics. Just people, clinging to whatever pieces of meaning they could carve out of the cold. Tonight, you lie down by the fire, stomach not full but no longer empty. You can hear dripping from the eaves, a rooster calling in the distance. You fall asleep with dirt under your fingernails from digging up wild roots, and you're okay with that, because the ground is soft, and spring is coming. Mud season. That's what they call it now. Not officially, of course, but often enough that it might as well be carved into the side of every barn and croft wall. Not winter, not spring, just mud. Infinite, all-consuming, ankle-snatching mud. The snow has melted, the frost has pulled back like a tide, and what's left behind is nothing short of carnage. The fields look like they've been churned by giants. The paths between crofts are indistinguishable from the latrine ditches, and every step is a gamble. You either slip or sink. Sometimes both. You used to complain about frozen ground. You'd give anything for it now. It's worse inside the crofts. The floors, packed earth for the most part, have turned spongy. Moisture rises from beneath like the house is sweating. Straw mats mildew overnight. The smell is foul, thick and sour, and there's no fire hot enough to burn it out. Your clothes never dry, not properly. The bottom hem of your tunic drags through wet straw, and by midday you're just walking around in a soggy rug. But despite the filth, there's movement. Life. The village is waking up. You hear more voices in the morning now, more people out tending to fences, checking livestock, hauling buckets. They're grumbling, of course. It's hard not to when you've just lost your boot in a knee-deep puddle and had to fish it out like a dead fish. But there's energy behind the curses, and that's something new. You head to the fields with a group of others, tools slung across your back, sacks half empty but ready. The soil isn't ready for planting yet, not really. It's too wet, too cold, but people are preparing it anyway. Scraping away the muck, turning the top layer, scattering ashes over the worst patches to try and soak up some of the excess water. No one says it, but everyone's thinking the same thing. If you don't plant soon, you don't eat later. The seed stores are small. Too small. Rats took their share over the winter and mould took the rest. What's left has to be handled like gold, measured, protected, whispered over. You remember your uncle counting out barley seeds one by one, placing them in a cloth pouch like he was counting coins. He did the same thing today, lips moving silently as if a miscount might offend the seeds themselves. And speaking of rodents, they're back. Mice in the walls, rats in the corners. You found one floating belly up in the rain barrel this morning. You didn't scream, just fished it out with a stick and threw it in the brambles. But your skin still crawls. You know what they bring: disease, ruin, teeth too sharp for creatures that small. There's a theory passed around the village that the rats know when the grain is ready, that they can smell it from miles away, and that spring to them is just a grand invitation. You've heard worse theories. One old woman swears rats are the servants of ancient gods, punishment for greed. You're not sure if she's wrong. But as bad as the mud is, as bad as the smell and the rats and the sopping clothes are, you're still grateful. Because it means winter's actually over now. It means things can grow again, even if they won't, even if the season turns against you again. There's possibility in the air now, and that alone is intoxicating. Today someone finds a clutch of eggs hidden behind a broken wall. Not chicken, too small, probably duck. It doesn't matter. Everyone gathers around like it's a treasure chest. The eggs are divided, cooked, shared. It's the best thing you've tasted in months. Rich, warm, real. You lick the bowl when no one's looking. There's an unspoken tension hanging over everything, though. A nervous hope. Because everyone knows what spring can be, but no one knows what this spring will be. The storms might return. The frost could come back and kill the shoots just as they break through, and there's always the risk of a failed crop. One season off, and you're right back where you started. Starving, desperate. But still, people plan. They barter tools, repair fences, rebuild what winter crushed. You help your neighbour patch his roof. He gives you a bone-handled knife in return. Nothing fancy, but the kind of blade you trust. You sharpen it slowly that night, the rasp of stone on steel soothing in its repetition. Historically, this was one of the most dangerous seasons for medieval villagers. Not winter itself, but right after it. Your stores are empty, your strength is low, and nothing's grown yet. If the rains don't let up or the seeds rot in the ground, you could still lose everything. Some historians call this the hunger gap. Others just call it the dying time. But you don't think about that tonight, not directly. Instead, you sit by the fire and dry your socks, finally on a stick. You make a game of it. How close can you hold them without catching them on fire? Too close. Always too close. You laugh when they smoulder. It feels good to laugh, even if your feet are still damp and your skin still itches from the rain. And outside the frogs are singing again. That's how you really know winter's done. The frogs always come back first. You fall asleep to the sound of them. A wet, rhythmic chorus rising from the edges of the bog, blending with the drip-drip of melting snow from the thatch above. The croft still smells like mud. Your hair is still damp, but your belly for once is not completely empty, and your boots are sitting by the fire drying, and somehow that's enough. The air smells different now. It hits you first thing in the morning before your eyes are even open, sharp, earthy and wet, but not in the suffocating way it did during the depths of winter. This scent is alive. It's the smell of roots turning in the thawing ground, of decomposed leaves from last fall finally releasing whatever ghost of energy they had left. It's muddy, yes, but rich, full of promise. You breathe it in and feel your chest loosen for the first time in months. You step outside the croft and blink against the pale sunlight. Real sunlight. Not the washed-out grey glare that's dominated the sky for so long, but actual golden light. The kind that makes your skin feel something again. You pause, turn your face toward it, close your eyes. This moment right here, this is what you've been crawling toward. The village looks battered, shabby, like it survived a siege, which, in a way, it did. The crofts are streaked with soot and weather damage. The fences are sagging. The paths are all but erased under layers of churned mud and broken thatch. But there's movement. Laughter even. Someone's banging away at a gate hinge nearby, whistling off key. A couple of kids are playing in the muck with sticks, pretending they're knights slaying dragons, though you can't tell which one's the dragon and which one's the knight. Doesn't matter. The fields are being turned over in earnest now. You help with it when you can. The soil is cold and heavy, reluctant to let go of its winter grip. You stab at it with a wooden spade, shoulders aching, hands blistering. But the more you work it, the softer it becomes. Worms wriggle up from the depths. The crows start to gather. Clever things, waiting for an easy meal. The seeds go in carefully, one by one, every placement a prayer. You don't speak while planting. No one does. It's a kind of sacred silence passed down through generations. Talking over the seeds is bad luck, someone once told you, though no one remembers why. You do it anyway, just in case. You're planting barley today, saving the oats for next week. The barley's a gamble. It grows faster but spoils quicker. Still, it's food, and food is all that matters. There's not much seed left, though. If this crop fails, there's no second chance. You press each seed into the damp earth with your thumb and whisper under your breath. Not words, just sounds. Something to fill the silence with something other than fear. Nearby, someone finds the bones of something. A sheep, maybe. Or a deer. Hard to tell anymore. Picked clean, white against the black soil. They carry it off without a word. There's a low hum of hope in the village now, but it's fragile. No one's forgotten what the last months were like. The frost-bitten toes, the hollow bellies, the silences at dinner. But there's a sense of motion now. That's the difference. In winter, everything felt stuck, like the world had closed in and left you out in the cold. Now, it's like someone opened a window. Still, danger lingers. One bad frost could ruin everything. A cold snap in early spring has stolen an entire harvest before. You remember the story of the year the ice returned in April, so cruel and sudden that the birds froze mid-flight. It's probably an exaggeration, but no one laughs when it's told, just in case it's not. There's also illness, a different kind than before. Now that people are mingling again, out in the damp, breathing the same air in close quarters, the coughs have returned. But these ones sound wet, deep. You hear them echoing across the village in the evenings, guttural, hacking things that go on too long. A boy down the hill has gone pale and thin. Some say it's just the season shifting. Others look away. Scholars today would probably call it tuberculosis, or maybe pneumonia, but here you just call it the breath sickness, and you keep your distance. Still there's celebration. Quiet ones. A woman gives birth and the baby survives. That's something. A dog that went missing in November returns, matted and thin but wagging its tail like it just went on holiday. Someone finds a cache of smoked fish hidden behind a collapsed wall, forgotten during the chaos of early winter. That night, everyone eats until their stomachs ache. It's the first time you've felt full in so long, it almost makes you dizzy. Fringe fact. There were medieval beliefs about eating too quickly after starvation, that it could kill you. Some said you had to coax the stomach back to life slowly, like waking a sleeping bear. That night, you ignore all that and gorge on fish until your belt threatens mutiny. No regrets. Later, you and a few others build a scarecrow. Not because birds are a threat yet, but because it's tradition. You stuff it with straw, dress it in an old tunic, and tie a crude face on with bits of charcoal and string. It leans like a drunk in the wind, one arm higher than the other, hat askew. But it's charming, familiar, a symbol that things can be planted, that the cycle is turning again. There's a quiet debate among the elders about whether to hold the spring festival this year. It's usually a modest affair, dancing, a bonfire, maybe a song or two. Last year no one bothered, but this year, maybe, just maybe. The evening's cool but not painful. You sit by the fire, your back sore, your hands filthy, your hair thick with ash and soil. You sip from a cup of weak ale, more water than anything, but it's warm. Your toes are dry for once, your fingers are not shaking. You stare into the fire and watch the sparks rise into the dark. Someone beside you is humming. A child is asleep in someone's lap. Somewhere off in the fields, an owl hoots once, soft and low. You're not comfortable, you're not safe, but for the first time in months you're not afraid. And that feels like a miracle. The fire's burning high tonight, but not for heat. It's for celebration. Real celebration this time. Not the grim kind with hollow eyes and forced smiles, but something true. The whole village is out. Every croft, every family, even the old ones who haven't stood upright in weeks are bundled in cloaks and leaning on canes, gathered near the great bonfire in the centre of the green. You can barely feel your toes, but you don't care. Your face is warm. Your belly has food in it. There's music, laughter, dancing. It's the spring feast, or at least your version of it. There's no exact date for this. No royal proclamation, no church-approved schedule. The village just waits until the air feels right, until the snow is truly gone, and until enough people agree, yes, it's time. And now, finally, after months of cold and mud and scraping by on bark and broth, you've made it. Somehow, you're here. There's bread, real bread, coarse, smoky, and flat, but still bread. You hold your piece with both hands like it might vanish. You tear into it, letting the crumbs fall into your lap, chewing slowly, reverently. You can taste the ash from the old oven, the faint tang of sour barley, and something else, maybe wild garlic or nettle mixed in. It tastes like work and victory. Children run through the gathering, their laughter shrill and wild. Their cheeks are flushed, not with fever this time, but with running and spinning and the kind of giddy exhaustion that only comes from chasing each other in circles around the fire. You hear someone shout about a game of stones starting near the old fence. You think about joining. Then you decide to just sit here a bit longer. Watch. Breathe. A fiddler scrapes a tune that's barely holding itself together, and a few villagers dance. Not beautifully, more like they're stomping the memories of winter into the earth. You recognize the song, though you don't know the name. It's one of those melodies that's been around forever, passed from mouth to ear, from toe to footstep, stretching back to gods no one remembers anymore. The kind of tune that has dirt under its fingernails. You glance around and take stock. Who's here, who's not? There are empty places, of course. People you lost in the cold months. One man, the baker's brother, just slipped away in the night. A girl who fell sick after the melt started. And others disappeared into the woods or simply didn't wake up one morning. No one makes speeches about them tonight, but you see their names in people's faces, their absence in the gaps between chairs. Someone sets a piece of bread on an empty stool. Someone else ties a ribbon to the standing tree. There's an old tradition tied to this night. One of the elders tells it again as the fire burns down low. If you eat bread under the first full moon of spring, you invite luck into your home. You don't believe in luck, not really, but you eat the bread anyway, slowly, thoughtfully, letting every crumb matter. Fringe fact: some Highlanders believed that bread made from the first flower of the season held protective powers. Not magical exactly, but symbolic. A way of anchoring yourself to the turning of the seasons. A way of saying, I made it through. You don't know if it protects anything, but it feels sacred all the same. Later someone sings. Not a loud song, not a drinking song, a slow one, a lament almost, though it carries something hopeful in the final notes. You know the words. Everyone does. You've heard it since you were little. A song about winter's passing, about the dead being remembered and the living being grateful. It's sung in Gaelic, and even if you don't know every line anymore, the tune settles in your bones like a lullaby. You sing along, quietly, just under your breath. As the fire burns lower, the stars come out. Faint at first, then bold. A few people lie back in the grass, staring up at them like they've never seen stars before. It almost feels like that. You'd forgotten how vast the sky is when it isn't hidden behind clouds and snow. You spot the familiar constellations, the hunter, the dog, the mother and child. Some people start to drift back to their crofts, tired but full. Others stay by the embers, sharing stories, passing a skin of something strong around in a quiet circle. You sit between both groups, unsure which you want more, sleep or more of this night. There's a scholarly theory that these seasonal celebrations served as social reset buttons in small communities, that after long periods of isolation, grief, and near starvation, people needed a formal excuse to feel joy again. Otherwise, the guilt of surviving might be too heavy. You believe it. Without this night, this fire, this bread, this shared breath, you don't know how you'd carry what came before. Before you leave, you walk past the old standing stone, the one where people placed their offerings weeks ago when the thaw first began. It's dark now, half covered in moss. You place your fingers on it for just a moment, like pressing your hand to someone's shoulder in thanks. Then you move on. You sleep warm that night, not just from the fire or the full stomach, but from the quiet knowledge that the worst part is over. For now, anyway. There will be more winters, more hard seasons. That's the way of things. But this one didn't beat you. And in the morning the sun will rise and you'll plant and you'll mend and you'll build, because the cold always comes back. But so does the fire, certainly. This is the final numbered section, section 30, of your bedtime journey through the brutal winters of medieval Scotland, followed by the 300-word wind down as instructed. Section 30. It's raining. Again. But now the rain doesn't bite. It's soft, warm even, if you stand in it long enough. It slides down your cheeks like a gentle scolding, and leaves the croft roof dripping in steady rhythms that somehow feel more like music than misery. You don't reach for your cloak this time. You just step outside and let it soak you. You tilt your face toward the clouds, close your eyes, and take a long breath. There's life everywhere now. The mud is finally firming into something like ground. The trees have burst into new greens, young, bright, eager, the kind of colour that only appears after a long, hard freeze. The fields are whispering with new shoots of barley and oat. You can almost hear them growing if you listen hard enough. Or maybe that's just your own heart thudding, unsure how to react to hope that doesn't come with a warning label. Your hands are rougher than they were at the start of winter. The skin split and healed again, until calluses took over. Your nails are dark with soil. Your shoulders ache in a way that feels permanent. But you're still here, still moving, still planting. And the village? It's alive again. Fully, properly alive. The laughter doesn't sound nervous now. The kids scream at full volume without adults shushing them. The old man with the missing ear has started carving again, and the woman who lost her voice for months from the cold sang a tune yesterday while washing clothes. Crofts are being repaired. New fences are going up. Someone's even building a beehive from coiled straw. You hear the buzz when you pass it. Faint, soft, persistent. One of your neighbours got married last week. No fancy ceremony, just a circle of people, a shared cup, and a promise muttered under breath. They danced after. Not well, but honestly. You joined for a song or two, then stepped back and watched the others. It felt like something ancient waking up in your chest. At night the hearth still burns, but not with desperation now, just comfort. You sit with your back against the wall, legs stretched, a hunk of cheese and a scrap of bread in your lap. Your cloak, dry and patched, drapes across your shoulders like an old friend. You've had it for years. You hated it in January. You'd burn it tomorrow if spring offered you a new one, but tonight it's enough. You think back over the winter, not just the cold, but the days that blurred together, the nights when you counted drips from the ceiling or stared at the door listening for things that might never come. The hunger, the howling, the silence. It all feels far away now, like something that happened to someone else, or like a bad dream you tell yourself wasn't really that bad, even when it was. And yet, it was. You carry it with you. Everyone does. It changes the way you walk, the way you look at the sky, the way you hold your spoon when food is scarce. It makes you slower to trust and quicker to thank. It teaches you that survival isn't always loud or heroic. Sometimes it's just waking up and tying your boots again. There's a debate, still ongoing, always ongoing, about whether medieval peasants were more resilient than modern people, whether the constant proximity to death, discomfort and hardship made them tougher or simply numbed. You're not sure. All you know is that in the dead of winter, when everything froze and no one was sure if they'd see the thaw, you kept going, and so did they. Tonight you lie down on your mat with no fire. You don't need it. The air is warm. The roof doesn't leak. A bird sings outside the window, and for the first time in months you don't flinch at the sound of wings. And before your eyes close, you whisper something into the dark. Not a prayer, not a fear, just a thank you. So there you have it. One long, wet, frozen, muddy, miserable Scottish winter, from your sore, blistered feet to your cracked, wind-burned lips. You made it. You survived it. Barely. And maybe even came out of it with a few calluses and stories worth retelling, or suppressing entirely. Life in medieval Scotland wasn't about grandeur or glory, it was about endurance. And winter tested that endurance harder than anything else. It stripped life down to its rawest elements: cold, hunger, silence, and demanded that you keep going anyway. No central heating, no store-bought soup, no weather alerts, just instinct, grit, and a fire that needed feeding. But look at you now, sitting there, warm under your covers, hopefully with something soft playing in the background and not a single wolf pawing at your door. Luxury. As you drift off tonight, think of the quiet strength of those villagers, their hands in the dirt, their shoulders in the wind, their eyes on the sky, measuring clouds like fortune-tellers. Think about what it means to keep going when the world gives you nothing but darkness and ice. And remember that even the longest winters, the ones that feel like they'll never let go, eventually do. So rest easy. You're through the worst of it. And tomorrow, the ground will be a little softer, the sun a little higher, and maybe, just maybe, you'll hear birdsong before breakfast. Sleep well, brave survivor of the Scottish winter.